I'd like to call this meeting of the House Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee to order and ask you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. I'm going to ask the members to introduce themselves. We're also being joined by some members from the northwestern part of the state who have an interest in this issue. So they've joined us, and I welcome them. But we'll start with Representative Gillen.
Representative Mark Gillen, Berkson, Lancaster County, live on a 40-acre farm, mostly in woods.
Representative Russ Diamond, Eastern and Northern Lebanon County.
Dawn Oberlander, Clarion Armstrong, and part of Forest.
Mindy Fee, Northern Lancaster.
Mark Keller, I have Perry and Cumberland counties.
Rich Irvin, I have all of Huntington County, parts of Center, and parts of Mifflin.
Steve Bloom, part of Cumberland County.
Eric Nelson, Westmoreland County.
Kate Klunk, Southern York County.
John Lawrence, Southwestern Chester County, and a part of Lancaster County.
Carrie Golden, Executive Director of the committee.
Martin Causer, I represent McKean, Potter, and Cameron counties.
Eddie Day-Pashinsky, Luzerne County.
Destiny Siders, Democratic Executive Director.
Sid Kavulich, 114th District, Lackawanna County.
Pam Delicio, the 194th, parts of Philadelphia and Montgomery counties.
Good afternoon. My name is Lee James. I represent Venango County and part of Northeast Butler.
Hello, everyone. Dan Mel, Adams County.
Okay. Good afternoon. David Millard, Columbia County.
And Representative David Zimmerman from Lancaster County is walking in. As you can see, we have a great turnout today. I thought for a while that it might be just Chairman Pashinsky and I sitting here, but obviously that's not the case. So thank you to all the members who are here with us today. Our committee has done a significant amount of work on forest products issues over the last couple of years, and in fact, last year held an informational meeting in McKean County to talk about forest products issues, and we specifically spoke about the governor's Green Ribbon Task Force and some recommendations that they had made in the task force report. One of those being forest conservation easements. And so today our topic is forest conservation easements, and also recent PENNVEST transactions whereby PENNVEST assisted in financing transactions for the purchase of private forest land by a private forestry company from New Hampshire. There's been a lot of questions and some concerns raised about those transactions. So today we're here to look at the details. We're hoping to find out more information about, number one, what a forest conservation easement is and all the details surrounding those easements, and also to dive into the details of the recent PENNVEST transactions and any future proposed transactions of that nature. So our first testifier is going to be Secretary Cindy Dunn, the Secretary of the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and her agency's been involved in all aspects of these transactions and forest conservation easements. So I'd invite Secretary Dunn and anyone from her agency that she'd like to join her, and we look forward to the information presented. I do want to remind the members that this is an informational meeting, but the meeting is being recorded, so we are recording the meeting, and the members are advised. Secretary Dunn, welcome, and we look forward to the information that you'll present today.
Good. I'll invite some of my staff and partner up to the table. John Norbeck, our Deputy Secretary for Parks and Forests, Seth Castle, our Chief of our Planning Operation, Sarah Nicholas, our Policy Director, and then if you don't mind, we have a forest manager from Lyme here, David Andres, who's working with a company retained by Lyme Timber. He's come down from Caldersport this morning. And so our goal would be to be able to answer all your questions. We got as long as you do, and so give me the hook when when you want to move into questions. But I do want to pick up on something you mentioned. It's gratifying to us at DCNR that this committee is focused so much on forests and the forest product industry. Frankly, I've been in the agency on and off for decades, and we feel like the forest product side of the whole agricultural spectrum gets lost in the shuffle, and this committee has done tremendous work on that issue, from the payment in lieu of taxes bill that you and Representative Millard and Representative Oberlander sponsored, to the tax code amendment that Representative Millard and Lawrence did, to the Good Neighbor Agreement that Representative Rapp did, to your interest in the Green Ribbon Task Force and DCNR's efforts, as we do consider forest and working forest a major part of our mission from the beginning. And so I think that spending a little time today and thank you for this opportunity to answer questions. I know there are some concerns out there, and I want to make sure we get you the information you need for your committee work. But again, thanks for this opportunity. For just a little background for us, parcelization and changing ownership of these large forest tracts does raise a concern for us, and especially in the northern tier of Pennsylvania. It affects rural communities and jobs. It affects our mission as well. We take for granted that the northern tier will be forested forever, but I think without some deliberate assistance, that would not be the case. It's going to take some policy and focus for that to remain in forest. A lot of these large land holdings, once held by paper companies and water authorities and timber investment companies, are being subdivided and sold, and they happen to usually get parcelized and divided, which is less efficient for the industry and frankly raises the danger that large parcels will not be available for timber harvest. So that's the concern that we were looking at. 70% of Pennsylvania's forests are privately owned. Dr. Jim Finley's here. He's the real kingpin of that knowledge. His work at Penn State over the decades focused on the private forest land side of things, and that trend of land ownership in the private forest land side of things is something to pay a lot of attention to in Pennsylvania. Those who care about the timber side of this the equation and the larger ag spectrum. When I came onto the job, Governor Wolf, who really knows this business because he came from a wood cabinet manufacturing, really asked me again and again, how can we secure and improve and save the jobs associated with the forest product industry? We'd seen this big decline after the recession of '08, and frankly, driven by housing starts, had really declined with the recession. But other factors were at play as well. And the forest product industry in Pennsylvania is about a $17 billion industry. My guess is that probably undercounts some sectors of that business. So this is a complex question, so we set up a Green Ribbon Task Force. We do have the report's available for you. We deliberated over more than a year. It was a very broad group of 35 people. People from the forest product industry, the Forest Products Association, Paul Escava, who sadly is gone, was a part of every meeting. Lewis Lumber, Domtar, Woodmode, Nature Conservancy, the Penn State Goddard Chair, many, many more. And there were sets of recommendations came out of this. One big bucket of it was on the conservation of large working forest tracts. And that's the part of it that DCNR chaired. And out of that work group came a desire for a model to look at forest land conservation differently than the department ever had. The past practice had been to acquire land fee simple. It resulted in the 2.2 million acres of forest land we have. But that model, we needed another model. Many areas in the northern tier are not interested in more public land, more land in state ownership. So we needed another model to help conserve these large forested acres. So we started talking about a forest easement program, very similar to the popular farmland preservation program. We have Pennsylvania leads the nation in farmland preservation, but we don't have an analogous program on the forest side at all. So we started this discussion, and then PENNVEST came into the picture, and Lime Timber came into the picture, talking about the possibility of using the revolving loan fund, as other states do, to secure a loan to be paid back over time through revenues coming from the forest. And so that's where the concept came from. So on October 17th, and again in October of 2017, and again on January of 2018, PENNVEST awarded low-interest loans totaling $50 million to Lime Timber for the purchase of about 60,000 private forested acres in 3 counties in Pennsylvania. And Lime has matched this amount with each twice as much private capital, so over $100 million on their part. These lands, for any of you who know that area, were known as the Hancock lands, are owned by the Hancock Company, a Canadian company. Lime is in the process of purchasing them. Lime's a U.S. company, and the interest rate that was provided by PENNVEST, which PENNVEST is way more qualified to speak, and I know they're speaking today about the loan and how that will be paid back. But the interest rate was 1% for 20 years. And since Lime is a for-profit corporation, it has to find ways to pay back the loan, but also secure and generate return for the shareholders, and that's where the sustainable timber harvest comes in. So as part of the project, Lime will be donating a over 9,000 acre easement. We're in discussion at DCNR with them on that. They will spend $700,000 to address acid mine drainage pollution in one of the watersheds. And as you'll learn from PENNVEST, it is a water quality revolving loan fund, so this acid mine drainage remediation is part of that water quality side. And Lime is working to rehire the people who've been working those lands previously, like David Andres, to retain and maintain good jobs and to really attract jobs into the area's economy. So that's a big plus. Again, the governor's metric on me is jobs, so the thing I need to answer is about jobs. So Lime coming in and hiring and building the job base in that area is really important. So we're pretty excited. We feel like it's a win-win. We're calling this a working forest conservation and public access easement. And DCNR's broad mission, recreation, is part of our mission. So any easements held by us will be open to hunting, open to outdoor recreation, hiking, etc., which is another major economic driver in the northern tier. In fact, in all of Pennsylvania, it turns out, Outdoor Industry Association just named Pennsylvania 5th in the nation for outdoor industry. We're very much an outdoor state, hunting, fishing, hiking, camping, you name it. So the economics of this win-win scenario are positive on the recreation aspect as well. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or ask my staff to answer any questions on either the concept of a working forest conservation and access easement, or on the Lime Timber project per se, or on anything else with the with the Green Ribbon Task Force that you would care to ask.
Thank you, Secretary Dunn. One question that I have is, we know that the 2 PENNVEST meetings have occurred, and so the $50 million was approved at the 2 PENNVEST meetings. Can you tell me the exact status of those 2 projects at this point? Has the transaction occurred? what's the status of the forest conservation easement on a portion of that?
Probably it'd be best to have Brian Johnson answer that directly. DCNR is not a direct party on PENNVEST. We don't have a seat at PENNVEST, so probably your more precise answer will come from Brian Johnson when he speaks.
And as a follow-up to part of what you said, one of the concerns that I've been hearing from folks is recreation access and hunting access. And in the information that was provided from Lime Timber to PENNVEST, they state that this is the forest conservation easements are expected to broaden public access for hunting, fishing, recreation, while also accommodating cabin and other traditional uses by private hunting clubs. But then in the next section of the document provided, it talks about the prohibition of conversion of timberland to agricultural uses that would impair water quality, the retention of cabin leasing, and in some cases, exclusive hunting rights for local hunt clubs. So that bears the question, if we're going to, it bears the question, what is it, to be honest with you? Is it greater access to these lands, or is it the protection of private hunt clubs and keeping the land posted, which much of the land ends up being posted and then leased out to private hunting clubs?
Yeah, I can answer that. We're beginning to look at the donated easement lands, and there is one deeded hunting interest, and so that stands. That's a legal deed. On the non-deeded ones, then our goal would be to open it up to broad, complete public hunting. And sometimes, frankly, there's a transition of a year or two with a club. We don't think there are buildings on the land in our earliest assessment. I don't know, Seth, if we've seen any buildings. We don't think. No, here's the expert, David, is saying he's been on that land. There's no buildings. So our goal was public hunting. We by mission and by Constitution serve all Pennsylvanians, and our goal is always open public hunting. And so where we have that authority, that we would assert that.
I guess my question is, we're loaning $50 million at 1% to purchase, in this case, 60,000 acres.
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to be open to public hunting, or is it going to be leased to private hunting clubs? I mean, that's what the folks in the Northern Tier are going to be asking. And, in one part of the document, it talks about expanded hunting rights, but then it also talks about protecting the private hunt clubs. But then in another section says Lime would agree to operate the entire 60,000 acre property as if it was subject to a single comprehensive. So you see what I'm saying? It's
Right.
back and forth, and it's not clear of which it actually is.
Yeah, and John, maybe he's looked at the documents a little closer,
So what I would say from very early on with talking with Lime is that we really want to, for the general public, we would like to see those properties that DCNR, if we have an easement on those properties for working forest and public access, is we really want that to look and feel like a state forest land. So you can go in there and hike, and you can hunt, and you can fish, just like any other state forest land.
But you see what my question is, though. The first thing a constituent in the Northern Tier is going to say is, you're using $50 million in state resources, although alone, state resources, to purchase land. Is it going to be open? Is all 60,000 acres going to be open to public access? And that's going to be a significant question.
go ahead.
So DCNR is really looking at the eased property, so where we would have the working forest easement, then our objective is to have that open to full public access. Frankly, it is still going to be private property, so Lime Timber Company is going to own that property, so properties that do not have a public easement, the decision to open that up to the public is up to the private landowner.
But you understand the use of public resources to actually purchase it creates a different situation where the public would want to expect something in return for that. Because when you look at this from a 30,000 foot view, you see you know, a $50 million loan at 1%, and an easement of just over 9,000 acres, and much is talked about with the acid mine drainage portion of it, but in reality, that cost about $700,000. So releasing $50 million, we're getting $700,000 in acid mine drainage projects. It could still leave the public with the thought of what more are we getting for the use of public resources?
So I do believe we're getting, over the long term, we're getting really good water quality payback from having this land in working forests. So it's not just the acid mine drainage work that Lime Timber has agreed to do, but it's also conserving those forest lands for the future for purifying water. I mean, the best water that we get in Pennsylvania comes from forested lands.
Is the forest conservation easement in perpetuity?
Yes.
Does it ever expire?
No, it's in perpetuity, yeah. And just to be clear, any lands where DCNR holds easement will be open to public hunting unless there's a deed that restricts that.
I understand that. I'm getting to the whole 60,000 acre tract.
And I only think there's only, I mean, as far as I know, there's only one deeded camp in the whole.
There is one, it's like 1,040 acres on a piece in Cameron County where there is a deeded reserve for recreation rights that cannot be transferred. But the rest of the properties are all open, and most of them are leased now to hunting clubs, and we'll have to look at the transition and how to take that, transfer that over to public. But Lime and Three Rivers Forest Management, where the company I work for, that we are expecting that the state is going to get something for their $50 million loan, for the low-interest loan, that we would be giving up the recreation rights.
Okay. And the option to purchase additional conservation easements, in the documents it says that option is expected to be for 7 years. What would happen after the 7 years if that option wasn't taken? You would just be... You would just keep the conservation easement that you have and would not have an option to purchase anymore?
So I think with any landowner, the option is probably going to be there even after the 7 years. Again, that's probably a question that's best answered by the landowner.
Well, you're negotiating with the landowner, so
absolutely,
you're the person that's here today to answer the questions.
We're trying. Our goal would be to do that in 7 years.
Yeah. Okay.
That's our goal.
I have some other questions, but I'm going to turn to some of the other members first for questions. Representative Mowell will be first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you guys for your testimony today. I'm going to back up the train a little bit, and I know that you're falling back on water quality, and I get what the chairman said about you're going to spend $700,000 to clean up the acid mine drainage, and I'm okay with that. I was always under the assumption that PENNVEST money was to be used mainly for sewer in Pennsylvania, grants to municipalities so that they can clean up their or have their sewer plants meet regulations for denitrification and so on. I wasn't aware that they were all finished. I wasn't aware that everyone had met all the standards and we had a plethora of money to lend out to private companies to buy land so they can timber it off. Can you tell me why PENNVEST is going down this road of lending, when it's all said and done, at least $50 million on this project alone to a private company, when we've got all the other problems in Pennsylvania that the money is actually supposed to be used for?
I would defer that to Brian Johnson of PENNVEST to answer that. I will point out this mechanism, I mean, there's nothing that cleans water better than forested land. That's initially why Pennsylvania was the Department of Forests and Waters. We conserved the public lands of Pennsylvania because of water quality. So it's not a new concept. In fact, it's some of the cheapest, easiest way to clean water is through land. I will point out, too, that the $700,000 of AMD funding Lime is doing that. Lime's paying for that. The private company's paying for that. So that's good. But if you don't mind, Representative Mao, I think Brian can answer the question better about the sewer plants and the other uses.
I get it, but if we don't lend these guys the money at this low-interest loan that's really supposed to be used for something else, are these forests going away?
That's a danger. From the time in the 80s and 90s, the timber companies were vertically integrated with, paper companies and such. The paper companies and forest product companies own land, own the mills, sold the product, and then due to accounting and tax law changes, they divested of land, and these timber investment management companies were set up. I mean, the closest example to your home is Gladfelder. Remember when Gladfelder sold all their land? But up there in the northern tier, there's big tracts. I mean, 10,000, 20,000 acre tracts. So they're held by these timber investment management companies and real estate investment companies, and changes in pension law, changes in tax code, they are divesting. And like the Hancock lands had been for sale for a couple years, and there wasn't, there apparently hadn't been a buyer. So if a company like Hancock didn't sell to Lime, their choice would be to start breaking this up. And then you start to get, someone from perhaps another area who can afford 1,000 acres, their own private reserve, and someone else can afford 1,000 acres, their own private reserve. And those people may or may not be interested in the forest product industry of Pennsylvania. They may not be from Pennsylvania. So I think this is the proactive approach that we heard was needed from the industry. We got to secure this land base, because forest products, I mean, we in the public lands, we rotate forests 140 years. I mean, to have a viable long-term forest product industry, you have to have a viable long-term product flow. And so keeping these in big forested tracts available for the forest product industry is key, and especially in the northern tier. And interesting, I mean, the forest product industry is big all over, is in every county of Pennsylvania, but it's really big in the northern tier. We did a survey to see, the forest product industry business, and they're everywhere. Every county of Pennsylvania has some forest product industry, but they're in the northern tier. That's where the big supply comes from, particularly cherry and some of the more valuable species. So yeah, there's a big concern that they would be parcelized and lost to the industry, and that this easement approach could really make a difference.
I'm just having a difficult time with the government stepping in on this, when really shouldn't the sale stay between private companies and using private money to do it, when that PENNVEST money should actually be used to help what it was intended to be used for. That's where I'm coming from. I don't ever remember hearing anybody ever say PENNVEST money is supposed to be used to buy land to put it into conservation easement. But thank you, I appreciate you. Thank you, Mr.
Thanks for your
Chairman.
point.
Representative Delicia.
And Mr. Chairman, some of my questions may be better directed at the PENNVEST representative, so if they are...
They're up next.
They're up next. So is there a value, Secretary, on the 9,000-acre easement? I see the value of the acid mine cleanup reclamation is listed as $700,000, but I was wondering if there is a value for the easement.
It's probably a third. Most of the time, those conservation and working forest easements are about a third of the sales price. I'm not sure that that's been determined quite yet.
A third of the sales price, when in fact it's about 15% of the whole?
A third of the
Sale price per acre.
A third of the sale price per acre. You're going to make me do the math. Okay, that's one. And then in reference to the acid mine reclamation, I applaud the, trying to rehire folks to be actively engaged. About how many jobs might that be? Are they considered temporary? What is the duration of such a project?
So I believe the estimate on the entire property is about 50 full-time jobs.
50, 50?
50, correct.
And is that duration, sir, ongoing? Is that for a time limited?
So that's ongoing. So what Lime has agreed to do is operate those forests, like the Secretary said, in a sustainable way. So they'll be doing harvests, as long as they own that property in a very sustainable way. It's also it will be evaluated by a third-party certification organization to ensure that they're operated in a sustainable manner.
So those 50 full-time jobs then are not just related to the acid mine reclamation, they are for the overall workforce of it?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I apologize if this was mentioned before and is this a working forest now?
Yes.
So is this 50 additional positions in addition to the workforce that's up there, or is this 50 total?
Maybe David can answer that.
So it would be 50 jobs total, including, like myself, I worked for a previous employer that helped manage that land. So I left my previous employer, but I'm going to be replaced there. So, there's a net gain of a job. But we're also going to be hiring the logging contractors, and so we're going to increase production of what has been done in the past, since the 2008, when cherry prices fell and Hancock quit harvesting at a sustained level. And so, including the foresters and the staff, the loggers, the people at the log yard, we're going to have log yards where we're going to sell and market the products, and the truck drivers and all that. So there's where we come up with a sum total of 50. And we weren't counting or I'm not counting the acid mine drainage abatement, because we're just paying for that. We're not actually going to do that. We'll hire somebody else to do that as separate, but.
Well, and that's actually my original question, were how many people were being hired in relation to the acid mine, because I'm trying to understand when it's valued at $700,000, is that including labor and materials, if you will, that $700,000 to clean that up, or is that just materials, or as opposed to labor as well?
So I am not somebody that has ever worked with acid mine drainage abatement. From what I understand, the agreement was that Lime would contribute $700,000 to pay for the projects on this tract in Cameron County that is going to have these, I think they're putting in 3 acid mine drainage abatement systems on 3 different drainages, and we're going to contribute $700,000 toward that. But that might also be a better question for PENNVEST.
Okay, so questions about the structure of the deal, Secretary, is better left to PENNVEST. Questions about the rate, the positive cash flow.
Yes.
Is this a soft second? Is this, what position does the Commonwealth have behind other lenders, et cetera? They are all my other questions.
Yeah, I'd say Brian Johnson is our expert from PENNVEST, and he can certainly answer those.
Okay, and then the 1040 that's currently deeded, is that part of the 9,000, part of the 60,000? I was a little confused about where that came in.
That particular tract, I believe, is 9,500 acres total, and there is just over 1,000 acres that is a permanent easement or permanent restriction on the hunting rights or recreation rights.
And is that by the current owner, or it goes back?
No, it was before Hancock, before FIA,
Goes back
before
a
that,
ways.
before IP, before Hammermill. So it's 5 owners previous.
Got it.
That reserved those rights back in the 70s, I believe.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate it. Was there a public opportunity to competitively bid this deal? How was Lime chosen?
Hancock has had the land for sale for some time, and I'm not sure how it was a private, it's a private deal, and I'm not sure how they found each other.
My question is an opportunity for $50 million in state funds at 1%.
Mm-hmm.
Was that publicly bid? Was that opportunity advertised and a competitive bid process? How did Lime find out about this, and apparently no one else knew about the opportunity?
I guess federal revolving loan funds have done this in other states. Lime operates throughout New England and New York. I suppose that's probably how they're aware of it. And that opportunity actually was on the table. Frankly, we at DCNR hadn't really explored that and knew about until we got this Green Ribbon Task Force and we're exploring this conservation easement option. So it was, it was sitting, that opportunity was there. It was, Lime was the one that figured it out, so. But, again, Brian Johnson from PENNVEST could answer their process. I mean, every quarter they have meetings and they consider opportunities and they make choices, and I'd have to defer to him on how that's done.
So regardless of the merit of the project, and I think the project has some merit, I guess from where I sit, it's troubling that we're talking about a $50 million 1% loan that was not competitively bid. And apparently, and I'll ask PENNVEST when they have the opportunity to testify as well, but apparently it was the private entity that figured this out. That seems troubling to me, that there was not an opportunity for perhaps a Pennsylvania-based outfit, perhaps Hancock itself. I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but just the fact that this would not be publicly bid, and in fact it appears the private company approached, and again, you mentioned federal funds in other states. I don't care about the federal funds in other states. I'm interested in the PENNVEST loan program here in the Commonwealth. So was there any public bidding? Was there any notification through the standard practices of the Commonwealth and notifying through whatever it would be, DCED, DCNR's website, PENNVEST, whatever it is? I mean, to echo Representative Mall's comment, if a municipality in my district wants to put in for a $25,000 small water grant, they've got to go through, a zillion hoops and get letters of recommendation from their state senator, et cetera. We're talking about a large amount of money here.
I'll just say, and Brian Johnson will say, PENNVEST meets quarterly and they receive a lot. Frankly, I'm glad this committee is so interested in this because, as you mentioned, as you see the merits of a similar program for ag that we have for farmland, you guys, you folks may have other ideas on how to support a forest easement program as well, and I'm hoping you do, because I do think the merits of the program for the industry, for recreation, for Pennsylvania's future are really pretty significant. We at DCNR we're happy that PENNVEST provided one avenue. There may be other avenues out there, and we're certainly open to other avenues. We have recognized for years that we're missing this tool in the toolbox. Farmland preservation is very popular in Pennsylvania. In fact, we're the leader in the nation. But ironically, on a farmland preservation easement, they carve out the forest land because it's not productive farmland. And then our feeling had always been this working forest land is really central to Pennsylvania's economy, central to our identity, central to our outdoor practice, and to have a tool in the toolbox for this private working forest land, and especially where an easement can then layer on these other public benefits like recreation. So I'm just encouraging you. We'll come as many times before the committee as you want us to turn this idea around and think about ways to do this. But I'm hoping, if nothing else, there's a lot of interest coming out of this and from other companies. In Hancock, though, I would say this. They're a Canadian company. They were divesting that land for a while for business reasons I don't know or understand. But they were pulling out of Pennsylvania. I don't know if they're pulling out of the United States, but they're a Canadian company. Lime is I've seen lime lands when I travel up in Adirondacks in New England. They're big in New England. They have a good track record. We were able to, explore with sister agencies. Their reputation is really good.
Right, and I have no doubt that it is. my point is, and I agree with much of what you said, I'm sure there would be support in the legislature for a forest preservation program. There's certainly support in the legislature for the state forests, which are along those lines. The farmland preservation programs that have been passed by the General Assembly and voted on by the voters of the Commonwealth over the years have enjoyed broad support. I suspect a similar proposal to protect forest land would enjoy strong support. But that's not what occurred here. What occurred here was funding that's supposed to be dedicated towards fixing water and sewer systems is instead being diverted with no public bidding to one bidder at 1% to acquire private land. Now, I'm not going to put you on the spot again for an answer, but that's how I see it. Now, this is my second question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. My second question is this. How long must Lime hold the ground? How long do they have to retain ownership under the arrangement?
They're a private company, and they can sell to another private company, but that conservation easement stays forever. So that's, I don't know, is there are further restrictions on Lime's holding?
So it does travel with the land, so it will be in perpetuity.
Right, I understand about the conservation easement, but my question is, how long must Lime Lime is enjoying a $50 million loan at 1% to acquire this property. How long do they have to hold the property once they take title to it?
So I'm not aware that there's a time limit on that, but Brian Johnson can answer that clearly. I mean, it's their agreement.
Okay, so...
If I could just take a second and try to answer one of your previous questions. So as far as the idea of bidding the process out, if you would draw a parallel for the agricultural preservation, you don't bid that out. So that's the landowner is the one that applies for that program. And this is the same type of...
Not to push back, but I would suggest there is a process in place there. So if everybody in this committee all owns 100 acres in Lancaster County, and we're all interested in farmland preservation, we're all going to put in our application. And, my ground stinks, but Representative Klunk's ground is high value, and it's got just joins of high value stream or whatever. So she gets the money and I don't. So there is a competitive process, and more importantly, everybody knows what the terms of the deal are before they get into it. Whereas that's not the case in this. We're talking about substantial ground and substantial money. My last question is this. Who owns the mineral rights to the property that Lime has acquired?
So we're beginning to look into that. It appears that the mineral rights are severed, so it'll be like some of the lands in the state forest system that we're managing now, where there's mineral rights severed. So the mineral right owners are probably not known to anyone at this time, but the vast majority of these are going to be severed rights as far as from our examination of the east lands now. So that would be a case where, as everywhere else in Pennsylvania, if they own the mineral rights, they can pursue the gas. So
the Commonwealth has entered into a $50 million loan and does not know who owns the mineral rights, which could be worth untold sums, and does not know who owns them, whether it's the acquiring company or a private landowner. I find that shocking. I hope PENNVEST has an answer to that question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Diamond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, thank you. And I'm going to ask this line of questions simply because you have folks from Lime here, because I think they're best at answering them. So as I understand it, it's about $165 million for the total 60,000 acres. Is that roughly correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's about $2,750 an acre.
Okay.
So 9,500 of those are going to be donated as an easement, and if I understand that properly, that means there's going to be no timbering period.
No.
No timbering on that land, is that correct? There will be timbering?
Yes.
Oh, okay, all right. And will there be timbering any different on that easement than the other 50,500 acres remaining?
No, the point of the easement was to donate the recreation rights.
Okay.
And not, Lime would retain all of the timber rights, and we would actively manage it as a working forest.
Okay, so then it's a $50 million loan at 1% over 20 years. I believe you said 20 years? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So then, can you give the committee an assessment? What is the value of timbering on this 60,000 acres of land? And what's in it for Lime? I mean, how much is Lime going to make off this over that 20-year period if they retain the land for that long? I mean, I think the people of Pennsylvania deserve to know who's going to be making money off the $50 million they're loaning out to buy this private land at 1%.
And so Lime made a decision to buy this land with the loan. It's all part of their equations that they work out. And we're going to manage it to make money because it's a private company. And that's what they've hired me to do, is to manage it on a long-term basis with third-party certification. And as far as the numbers, how much money we're going to make, we'll wait and see. Depends on all kinds of things, variables and prices.
There's been no assessment of the 20-year timbering value of this $60,000 worth, 60,000 acres of land.
I'm absolutely positive that they have. In fact, I've been told they've modeled it for 100 years.
Okay.
I don't have those numbers.
Is there a chance you could submit them to the committee for review at any point?
I don't know. I know I've been told the volumes that we will harvest, and we hope that prices are where they are, so for the next year, I know what kind of volumes I'm supposed to come up with. But as far as dollars compared to what we paid, I don't know those things.
I just think the public, since the public's money is being used to help do this, essentially almost 1/3 of the purchase price, I think the public deserves to know who is going to benefit and how much they're going to benefit off that 1% loan that they are providing the backbone for.
One piece of information that we'll have, and we'll alert the committee when it's available, Sarah Nicholas put in a grant application for a private grant to study the big TMOs, the forest product industry, and the issues that they face and the margin issues that they face. But I think one thing that's clear is that the margin on these large TMOs isn't what it used to be. So the low interest loan is probably a very important part of that equation. Again, I'm the last person to understand forest product markets, especially since it's very much a global market these days. But that study, when it's done, I don't know, Sarah, do anyone will have that? That'll be useful and interesting, I think, to answer.
Yeah, and look, I don't want you to have the wrong opinion. I'm all about somebody making money. I'm all about free enterprise and that sort of thing. However, because this is public money, I can't really qualify this as total free enterprise, so I just think that the public has an interest to know how much Lime expects to make off this land that they're essentially paying $2,750 an acre for, with a 1% loan guarantee, purchasing 1/3 of it.
I wonder if I could just feed off of that and describe this in a little bit different way. I think part of the confusion about this project is it is a new approach. It is not something that we've done a lot before. We don't see a lot of others, except maybe in a few other states, doing this type of model. It's a public-private partnership. And if you look at the investment as the cheapest possible way public funds could protect this amount of money, this amount of acreage. We're paying 1/3 on the dollar for all of these acres, and we're getting permanent conservation, we're getting permanent public access, we're getting permanent water quality protection. We are getting that at 30 cents on the dollar. If you did a typical project that we have done in the past, we would be spending $165 million to protect these same lands. Instead, Lime has come in and put 2/3 of the purchase price into Pennsylvania. We still get the same public benefits at 1/3 of the cost. So that's something that's really important that folks understand. We don't feel frivolous about the use of taxpayer money. This is a tremendous deal for Pennsylvania, for Lime, for hunters, for fishermen, for people who care about water quality. We're getting a tremendous deal. It just looks unconventional. because it is.
It's new, yeah.
I get it. I just think that because public dollars are being used here, the public's entitled to know all sides of what the cost benefit is for every player, especially if this is a partnership.
Yep.
That Lime will be partners with the people of Pennsylvania. So I believe the people of Pennsylvania deserve to know what their partners are going to get out of it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Keller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The questions have been asked, but I didn't really hear an answer, and I think it is a big concern of what is the value, estimated value of the timber on this particular project. I know for myself, as owning forest, you talk about a years out. Look, I've had bidding on parcels of my timber, and I know it's a year till they ever really harvested, but I knew what I was getting for it. So I have concerns in the fact that, what is the value there? I'm sure, I'm again like the rest, you got to make money or you wouldn't be in business, and I understand that. But what is the value? What is that value that we as a Commonwealth are, we talked about, 33 cents or 32 cents on the dollar. Is it really? It might be a lot less than that too. So that's why, I would really like to know, be supplied to this committee on what is the actual value, estimated value of that timber harvest that could take place there. So, thank you.
The other side of that, there's broad data out there about this, not specifically to the site, but the avoided cost of other water cleanups. We're spending a lot of DCNR funds on stream restoration and cleaning up, lands after they've been denuded from forest cover. So this is a clean, cheaper way to, keeping it in forest is the best thing you can do for water. So there's a lot been written about so-called green infrastructure, where keeping it green, keeping it forested, cleans the water, saves treatment costs, saves restoration costs, etc. And we have that sort of data. It's not specific to the lime timber, but in terms of expressing the public value, and since PENNVEST is essentially a water program at its heart, it's the source of the funding, EPA, describes the value, and we could make those publications available to the committee just to get a broad sense, to satisfy you on the public benefit here, that you can articulate that.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just one thing that just entered my mind, and I need to ask this. What type of timbering are we going to do? Are we doing a selective cut, or are we doing a clear cut? Because that relates back to the secretary of I know for a fact that, past experience, I don't cut trees over a certain size, but I keep, so that we have it refurbished, plus the fact of keeping the clean waters, and we all know that the forest floors do the best job of keeping our waters clear and clean. So, if it's a complete swipe out, we don't know that either. That would be something that,
And so if you look at the management strategy that Hancock has, it's going to be very similar to what the Bureau of Forestry does on DCNR lands. And yes, there are even age cuts, meaning we will do clear cuts, but they will not be done unless there's established regeneration there with following the BMPs that have been developed for the state and proper soil control, control the soil erosion. And that's part of the third-party certification that we're going to go through. They will be there to check. They will do annual audits on what we've been doing.
And if you look at these third-party certification models, whether it's FSC or SFI, they have water quality elements to it, buffers, water protection, watershed protection. So all the certification programs, and I'm not sure they've picked which one they're going to use yet, but they all have adequate, in our mind, protections for water. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Klunk?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In a similar vein as Representative Diamond, and I know, the representative from Lyme might not be able to provide the information today. Hopefully, we can get the information about, the cost per acre, how much money you're looking at making per acre, the cost involved with the company to harvest each acre. But if for some reason we can't get that from Lyme, I would hope that our state forester would be able to work up some numbers for us, because I'm sure you do that on state land.
Yeah.
So would you be able to work up those numbers for us for that particular parcel?
Sure, we'll share what we have. We're just beginning to negotiate the conservation easement, so, the PENNVEST part is one part, our part's really just beginning, and we'll come as often as you'd like. Again, we want to promote this easement model. We'll come as often as you'd like us to and share what we have.
Well, could you provide the committee with, an assessment of, the 60,000 acres, how much, per acre that, in that area is the going rate for timber,
do that,
number one?
yeah.
I think that would be helpful for us to know from a general market perspective. Did Lyme overpay, underpay for this particular parcel of land? I think that would be very helpful, because I'm from York County. We've got Gladfelter, but I don't know, the first thing about buying an acre of timber and what we're looking at price-wise.
Yeah, I think we could do that. We have, public lands in that area. We could certainly look at, similar amount of public land, with the current market, with cherry, with the current situation
Right.
with oaks and stuff.
I think that would be helpful to know about, approximately how much it would cost, per acre. What's the going market rate in that area for an acre? And then what is the, I guess they call it, is it stumpage? And the cost per acre for stumpage, coming back to, Lyme for that particular acre. I think that would be very, very helpful for us from a, transparency perspective. And then my question is, did DCNR work at all with PENNVEST on the front end of this project? Because it sounds like Lyme came to, DCNR or somehow found out about PENNVEST. How did this all come about? Was there any relationship with Lyme and DCNR? Had you been talking? Because my thought is, if it's only this 700,000 for the acid mine drainage pollution for that particular project, which is at the crux of why the project was awarded through PENNVEST, which is, in my mind, a loose connection at best when you're giving $50 million. So how did this all come about? Because it's not a Pennsylvania company. It just seems odd how this all came to be.
So and I'll ask Sarah for a little more definition, but I mean, the Green Ribbon Task Force was meeting. Our partners, the Conservation Fund, were at the table. Companies that know the players, discussed it with PENNVEST and Lyme. We met with PENNVEST. We were frankly advocates for this project. We've been looking for a model and looking for an opportunity. So I'll just say it. We're advocates for this model and looking for a tool to add forest easements into the mix. I don't know, Sarah, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, all I would add to that is that Lyme Timber is a fairly sophisticated company. They have been aware of using this state revolving loan funds that come from EPA to PENNVEST and to all the other state equivalents of PENNVEST in about 6 other states. They knew what they were doing when they came in. They contacted us. They had a series of meetings with us. They knew exactly what they wanted to do and how to go about it. Again, as the Secretary mentioned, we thought it was a good idea, but
yeah, and again, PENNVEST meets core. I can't speak for PENNVEST. My guess is they'll have other interests from other players as a result of this, but we're not at the table officially with PENNVEST. But we certainly provided the data and information we have to show that working forests can be an important element in water quality.
One more question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. So as a follow-up to Lyme, would Lyme have purchased this land had it not been for the low-interest loan through PENNVEST? Or is that the only reason why Lime purchased this land?
And so Lime has this model, and they've used it in like 14 different other locations where they know going into an investment that they have a chance to have, the conservation easement value taken off the land. And so there's a reason the land was for sale for 2.5 years before someone bought it, because no one else was interested. And then when Lime looked at it from this perspective, they were able to put together a model that they thought worked.
Thank you.
And, in the past, to be honest, over the years, DCNR had been resourced to buy more forest land. Right now, we're not. We don't have the money to buy. And to be honest, county commissioners from many of the northern tier counties are not enthused, I'll just put it that way, about new land being taken off the tax roll or land being in state forest land. That's the traditional model had been direct purchase of forest land by DCNR. But with tight budget times and with some of the counties expressing interest in keeping it in private land, this is why this is, in my view, a win-win. The public gets forest, the public gets hunting, public gets clean water, you get the recreation. The land stays in forest, which even, the county commissioners who don't maybe necessarily want more public forest land do want forest, though, so it's just, in our view, win-win. And it brings all this together at a much reduced cost. And it keeps it on the tax roll, so that keeps the budget secretary happy because he doesn't have to pay payment in lieu of taxes on it. So.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate your testimony today, and I'm a believer of the benefit of public-private partnerships. I think we're just trying to better understand, the scope of it, and also if just based off of, I pulled up a Penn State Extension study on land value and stumpage price. It has that stumpage value at about $1,800 per acre, with legacy, the expected long-term value, more jumping up to $2,400 an acre. But if I'm running the numbers correctly, and you're saying that all 60,000 acres would be able to be harvested through the time, if we just use that 1,800 value, that's about $108 million for the $50 million loan, which I'm not at all against a company being able to generate profit. I mean, PENNVEST will get $40,000 a month in interest on average. But if you could touch on the additional jobs that would be created, the reinvestment. So was this land being underutilized, and so this project is going to generate that $108 million of revenue through that tier, so this is going to be an increase in land value? And I know the other portion from the PENNVEST side, the transparency of how those, that, hey, if they have a good business model and they approached it, was there exclusivity, on the purchase of this? And of course, if there's oil and gas value that we don't yet know, that could be an outstanding deal. But could you touch on the increased jobs? I don't mind companies generating profit, but how much new work will be generated?
All right, so, may I?
Yeah, go ahead.
First, the value of the timber that's out there, it's not all going to be cut in that 20-year loan. When we repay the $50 million loan, it doesn't mean all the timber's been cut. We will cut growth. The model was to cut a little more than what growth is. You have the 67,000 acres, which I think the number actually is, and there's a certain amount of growth every year. And since it's been under-harvested over the last 10 years, we will harvest a little bit more than growth over the next 5 years to get it back to a standard volume per acre that we wanted to carry. And so that's how we're coming up with the model or volume that we're going to harvest. And so the jobs that will be created, there's going to be probably 4 foresters on staff. We only have 2 right now, but we're ramping up to get things started. We're going to hire logging contractors, and I don't know the number that we're going to end up with. Depends on the production that we get out of them and how much mechanization there is in it. And each of those is going to have truck drivers to haul them to different yards that we'll have. So we're going to have at least 2 log yards. They're going to be manned by 5 or 6 people that handle all of those and grade those and label them and market them. And so that's where our staff is going to come up with that number.
I appreciate the estimate, but it seems to be a pretty lean, if I'm doing $100 million of potential asset value over 20 years, I think I might have a forecast on how many jobs it's actually going to create, because that was one of the key items that was touted as a benefit of this program, is the economic development portion of it, not just the smaller portion of water quality. So we don't actually know, you're talking a handful of jobs for this, just because we're looking at the trade-off of PENNVEST money that would go to the water and sewage projects that we know, we have a lot out there that need to occur, and there is a direct benefit in correlation to the amount of not only improvement in water quality, but, the needed stimulus. I'm just surprised that for the amount of value, there's not even a rough guesstimate. I'm hearing 4 jobs in the replacement of yours, so that would be 5.
We're estimating 50.
And if we just seat of the pants here, if I end up with 4 foresters and an administrative assistant, there's 5 that actually work for 3 Rivers Forest Management. And then if we have 6 logging crews or 5 logging crews that are 4 or 5-man jobs, and then they've each got log truck drivers, and then we're going to have probably 10 people at log yards, it could easily be over 50. But I didn't want to overstep and say this is what it's going to be. So I don't know where we're going to end up, but we will create jobs. And some of those are existing jobs, but some of them are going to be expanded capacity. So.
Yeah, and that is I see that's in Brian Johnson's PENNVEST, PENNVEST testimony as well. But I would say too, the key point that he made is that it's not going to be completely harvested in 20 years. This is just like our state forest land. It's a long. That's one of the challenges of this industry. It's compared to conventional ag, it's so long-term, 140-year rotations, which is why, proactive actions today to, look out 20, 40, 50, 100 years for the northern tier are critical. So I think, we should keep working on this till we get a model, and find funding to secure that forestry future. It's statewide, but particularly the northern tier, where it's really the heart of the supply. And again, not to minimize the importance of the industry in every county I see represented around this table, because it's interesting to me that one study we did showed how important the industry is across Pennsylvania. And I'm glad this committee is interested in this, and we'll keep coming back anytime you want to discuss that. Not that, Secretary Redding probably doesn't want me taking much. He's a big supporter of this, by the way. He was on the Great Ribbon Task Force, and I know there's a lot of issues in agriculture, but this forest side of it's interesting and has a lot of opportunity.
Chairman Pashinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, and thank you all very much for taking so many questions. After hearing not only your testimony, but many of the comments and questions, I'm looking at it from the standpoint of you have 60,000 acres. It's been there for a long time. You've said that it's taken over 2.5 years to have anyone interested enough in order to try to cultivate those 60,000 acres. You've indicated that you're going to still provide the same sporting events, opportunities for fishermen and hunters, et cetera, that you've had. There's going to be an increase in jobs with this sale as opposed to if it stayed the way it is. It was a working forest. It will continue to be a working forest, however, of a more manageable, a more profitable, you're going to expand that. and well within the regulations of making sure that you do not deforest it. Because again, we're concerned about the water. If we did not go through the sale, we would still have X amount of acid mine water that's polluting X amount of streams, et cetera. So by the sale, we're going to be able to eliminate that. You have some buffer zones, right? That's also another way that we're going to help preserve better water. I'm just trying so that the folks that are out there listening, as well as myself, if we did nothing, what would the state and the people have as opposed to now with this purchase? And if it was up for sale for 2.5 years, anybody in this business that would like forest land and to own it, they had the opportunity. I'm trying to demonstrate that there are some advantages here, and I know that my colleagues are trying to take some of those advantages and try to put it into a dollar amount to justify the sale. I think that's what everybody's trying to do. And as we continue to hear your testimony and the rest of the folks that are going to testify, hopefully more of those answers will come forward. But it appears as though it's certainly a good step in the right direction, and you're going to preserve the land, you're going to timber it appropriately. It's still going to be private dollars, which means the taxpayer is still going to get their tax dollar, and we have the opportunity for more. Okay, that's about what I'm seeing so far. We don't know exactly what that number is, but it looks like we're headed down the right path. Is that fair to say?
That's right. I mean, we were excited. We're excited to bring another company in to this Commonwealth, and one that will invest in our workers and our companies and subcontract with loggers. Again, it was a private holding, a Canadian company, now it's a private holding U.S. company with a lot of public value being layered on. It's a new model. It gives us all a chance to look at and kick the tires on something different and positive. The clean water benefits are not to be underestimated. It's the primary focus for PENNVEST. We'll gain on the public access and recreation side. But again, it's we're very excited by it. It's a new horizon for forests of Pennsylvania, and again, we're delighted that there's so much interest in it. We'll continue to answer questions as this evolves.
And on the loan, do they pay that back yearly at the end? How does the loan work?
Yeah, that's again for Brian. Brian's the PENNVEST manager, and that's
so we'll wait for PENNVEST?
He's the expert on the dollars. Yeah.
All right, well, I'm more than happy to wait for PENNVEST then to say. And I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Bloom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the easement that's kind of the heart of this thing that is part of the big public benefit, is it my understanding that Lime actually was able to complete the purchase, receive the approval, without the terms of that easement actually being finalized?
That's correct, yeah. And Seth's working on that.
So
the loan is for the, for the water.
You may want to pull the microphone.
Okay. Go ahead. Yeah, we'll give it to Seth.
Yeah, we have, so we're still working on the exact terms of that easement and what we'll be purchasing from the Commonwealth side of things, so as far as the public access provisions and the provisions of the conservation easement. So we essentially,
So we basically authorize the release of the public funds, not really knowing what the deal even is? Am I understanding that right?
There was some other conservation partners involved, for example, like the Conservation Fund, and so they put options to purchase, and there was provisions in that purchase to have a conservation public access type agreement to be further defined, and that's what we're
what leverage do we have now to negotiate the best possible deal for the public if the funds are already released, approved?
So we have to, before, it's my understanding as far as, and this might be another question for Brian, but they can't draw down the PENNVEST funding until we finish our negotiations with the conservation easement and the terms.
So the funding can't be drawn down, but it's already committed. No one else can be using it. The public can't use it for anything else.
That'd be a question best for PENNVEST. But we're working through that. So we're coming up this new easement model to be applied to not only the 9,000 acres that will be donated, but the potential for additional lands. And so that's, Sarah and Cindy mentioned that it's a new approach for us. So we have to, come up with those terms and come up with how that's going to be in the best interest of the Commonwealth, for decades from now, everything, from the public access and the conservation easement side.
I mean, I'm concerned that we basically committed the funds, tied them up, prevented anyone else in the public interest from using them, and yet we're still negotiating, and we may have given up our key leverage in that negotiation, and it's kind of like we made a deal to make a deal, which in legal reality doesn't really get you anything.
Yeah, the concept of the easement is,
But it's a concept without terms. We don't know what the terms are.
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm concerned about the way that, it seems like we were putting the cart before the horse and not necessarily protecting the public interest. Thank you.
Representative Zimmerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Are any of these lands zoned? And if so, how?
We know that. No, we don't know that, yeah. I don't know that area.
Is that an answer you can get us?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Also, how many counties and municipalities does this actually cover?
You want to talk about that,
Do
John?
we have that information?
Yeah.
I don't have the number of municipalities, but we've got Cameron County, Clinton, Elk, Jefferson, McKean, and Potter.
What's Clinton?
So about 6 counties.
Oh, okay.
Okay. If you can get that information, that'd be appreciated. Thank you.
Representative Mao, did you have a follow-up question? A brief follow-up?
This will be very, very quick. I promise. It's just been eating at me. And it's probably Seth, you're writing the agreement?
I'm working with our Lime and our partners to craft the agreement.
Is the agreement already written? I keep hearing it's going to be open for hunting, fishing, hiking, biking, whatever. I keep hearing that. Is there something definitely written in black and white in the agreement that there will be no more new leases? And I understand you have to honor leases and cabins that are already there, but absolutely no more leases, and the land will stay in perpetuity open for these activities.
So, and that's what we are, so that is our intent, and that's what we are, our position. So we feel like for a public access easement, we want it to have all the aspects of, like, that people expect on state forest land. So public hunting, those other...
But it's not written yet?
We're negotiating those terms as we speak, and it is our stance from the department's perspective, that that's what we need.
I know it's what we want.
Right.
But I think this goes right back to Representative Bloom's point. You've already made the deal and don't have the terms of the deal locked up. I've never done business in 40 years of doing business. I've never, ever once done business that way.
Look, the deal that was made was between Lime and PENNVEST. The deal with DCNR has not been done, and that's
well, whoever's in the middle of this agreement, whether it's PENNVEST or you, and I know you're getting something out of it, you're getting an easement, I get all that. But normally, when I make a deal, the terms of the deal are done before I sign a check or before I receive a check. I've never done a deal where you commit funds. The bank has never said to me one single time in 40 years of doing business, here, we'll guarantee you your loan. By the way, tell us what you want to use it for. I've never, ever seen that happen in the private sector ever once. Nor would I ever expect it, and I wouldn't expect it of our government. Put the terms in order first before you tie up the funds. is the way I would see it. The other thing is,
Yeah, and that's what we're doing. And any conservation easements we buy, they'll be locked up before any purchase of conservation easement. We're the beneficiary of this donated easement. But I can just tell you that the department is not interested in any land where we don't open it up completely to the public. That what the deeded, a deeded reserve is something that's in a deed, we can't affect that, but all the other ones, we're into the 100% public act. That's what the public wants. That's what they'll turn to us and ask. That's what they'll turn to you and ask.
I trust that
public
that's
access.
the way it's going to work
Yeah.
out in the end. Just real quick, though. Okay. All right, forget it. I won't get out. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we're out of time. Thank you, guys.
I know, yeah.
Thank you, Representative Mao.
Say it, I know. Yeah, there's two deals. PENNVEST loan, DCNR easement. Yeah, I hear what you're saying about our business. Believe me, Lime or any other one we've dealt with would say we drive a hard bargain on the public side. I feel confident in saying that. But I appreciate, your concern, because we know that we'll get the calls and you'll get the calls if there's a transaction with DCNR that they can't hunt on or hike on or whatever. So I hear you, and we're with you on that.
Thank you. And our last questioner is Representative Tobash.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. I am trying to be real brief, but a couple of these things come together and they have a question. So easement, perpetuity, long time, right? And still working out the details. But a couple things that we heard here today, and I don't know if you're contemplating these things, so I kind of heard no ag. Ag, no. Yes?
Correct. There's an ag farmland preservation program.
Right.
Ag.
Recreation? Yes.
Yep.
We're talking about land here that has been degraded by some mining that's been in the past, and we're trying to clean that up. How about mining and remining? Are you contemplating that in this easement, that there will be no more mining or remining?
Well, that's another, yes. And again, if neither Lime nor we have the rights, that the severed rights and the coal rights, whoever would own those, that would be something that, depending on the situation, but there are protections in the easement we're working on to, as much as we can.
Work in process, right?
Yeah.
Energy exploration?
Energy exploration
Yeah. on this land?
If they're severed rights, the severed right owners would have the opportunity to do, just like any other severed lands in Pennsylvania.
And that goes to Representative Lawrence's question to drilling on the land, yeah.
Yeah, that's something, that's an issue we can't control. The Pennsylvania law severs those mineral rights. There are lands under state parks, under forests now, that are severed rights that we don't have the right to, and then under Pennsylvania law, they have the right to explore and get those mineral rights that they own. So
But the school's still out on who is the owner of these prior to the...
We did an initial, through our internal just knowledge of severed rights, and our own minerals folks in forestry believe that a vast majority of the rights are severed.
Already been severed, thank you.
But as we purchase easements, there'll be further, research on the title work as we make the individual land deals from the department side of things with the easement, and we'll have better clarity on that.
Yeah.
As you can see, there's a lot of questions by many members, and I've certainly heard from constituents with a lot of questions also. Questions about, is this the best use of public resources? What are the terms of the easement, as we've heard here today, such as access for recreation? Even from the perspective of, will Lime be using local sawmills to process the timber? That's a question. And we've talked at length here today about the two $25 million loans for the 60,000 acres. But one question and follow-up to that is, Madam Secretary, are you aware of any future projects that are pending for consideration before the PENNVEST board?
I think that'd be a question for Brian. I would guess there'll be some interest generated, just as the committee is, but I would leave that for Brian.
I understand we have a whole list of questions for Mr. Johnson. I'm sure he's excited to. But
What's that?
and I realize this is a question for him also, but are you aware of any additional projects that might be forthcoming in addition to the 60,000 acres?
I'd heard there'd been an inquiry, that's all I could say, but again, I'm not on the PENNVEST board, so I don't get the packets, I don't see the information, so.
But DCNR has been actively involved in this project, so
Right.
it's a legitimate question. Are you
No,
aware?
I don't at this point know who is asked, so I do know there's been an inquiry, and I don't know how far it's gone, whether it's a formal request of PENNVEST or whether it's a verbal inquiry, and I don't happen to remember the name of the inquirer.
So you are aware that there are additional projects?
I think there'll be a lot of interest in this approach, or some interest in this approach, yeah.
So there are additional projects
I'm aware of
potentially
one
pending?
inquiry, and I don't know
inquiry.
how far it's gone with PENNVEST formally.
But you don't know the details of those additional?
No, I don't. I don't know if anyone here does. I don't, yeah.
No one on your team knows?
No, I don't.
Nope.
Okay. Thank you for the information that you've presented here today. The information is helpful for the committee, and we appreciate the information you've provided. Thank you.
Thanks for your interest. We'll come back anytime you want us. I know. I'll say it 5 times, yeah. I'll say it.
So our next testifier will be Mr. Brian Johnson. He's the Executive Director of PENNVEST, and also Dave Henning, Project Manager for PENNVEST. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here today. I know that you've been here through the previous session, so you heard a lot of the questions, and we look forward to the information that you present today, and I know the members are lining up with questions already.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this opportunity. I could probably just go in to start answering questions now instead of go into to the remarks, but I think I'm going to spend just a couple minutes on some remarks here so that we can maybe couch what we're doing and may answer some of the things up front. You folks may recall that when PENNVEST was first put together in 1988, Pennsylvania led the nation in waterborne disease outbreaks. Since that time, we've funded a number of water projects, wastewater projects across the Commonwealth to the tune of about $8 billion. We've been able to move the mark. All of the wastewater treatment plants that needed to meet nitrogen and phosphorus removal within the Chesapeake Bay have done so. They're the ones that have actually met what they were to meet, many of them with PENNVEST funding. Some of the program innovations that we have with PENNVEST allows us to not only fund public but private entities as well. Low-interest loan money, some of them are eligible for grant, but any public or private entity, if you're an owner or an operator of a water or sewer or stormwater system and have a water quality impact, you're eligible for PENNVEST funds. The other thing that we have done that's a little bit different is to twist the environmental concept in with the economic development. So we can take economic development in as a criteria. We take it as a ranking criteria in addition to public health, public safety, environment, compliance, those sorts of things. Since 2009, PENNVEST has been supporting non-point source projects. That's what this line project is, what we call a non-point source. And we funded a good number of projects, like I think 284, if my notes are correct, to about $167 million in non-point source activities. And that includes projects that are anywhere from tree plantings in the city of Chester, the city of Lancaster, doing some riparian buffer work, manure management work on some maybe plain sect farms in Lancaster County. We've done a number of non-point source activities. And many have been loans, some of them have been grants, depends on the capacity of the recipient. Lime timber was our first opportunity to really work directly with the lumber industry. This sort of scenario, it helps us fund a project that only had a benefit to water quality, but actually supported the economics of the timber industry as well. We require planning consultation for every project that comes into us. If that planning consultation allows our staff, Dave, in this project, DEP, to sit down with the project sponsor and go through the PENNVEST program, find out, A, if they're eligible, find out what the project's all about, gives us an opportunity to tell them what possible financing may be there, what the time frames would be to submit an application, to receive funds, the whole shtick. And so that helps us go through. So the first question with this one was, is it an eligible project? And because we haven't had one like this before, we contacted EPA, and because that's what we would use the source of funds for this. And I've talked to other states. I know they do similar projects, but I never actually did one, so I wanted to make sure that this was the same sort of thing. And yeah, and EPA, and I think hopefully in the handout materials, you have materials from EPA that identifies this as an eligible activity. Actually should have some examples in there of other states that have done similar projects as this with the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund as well. So we took that as a yes, that this was the type of project that we should look at, the type of project that is eligible. And subsequently, Lime Timber came in for the purchase of 60,000 acres of forested timberland and place a portion of it into a permanent working forest and construct acid mine remediation activities in at least 3 sites. Best management practices, protecting drinking water resources and non-point source activities. The examples that were provided with EPA kind of gave us an idea of the types of things that we should be looking for when we look at these sorts of projects. And we were able to talk with some of those folks to find out some pitfalls, things that, you know, we don't want to make the same mistakes that maybe some other states have made when they proceed with these. Every project that submits an application with PENNVEST receives a financial capacity analysis. Act 16 of 1988 stipulates the maximum interest rates that we can charge in any given county based on the county's unemployment rate as it relates to the statewide unemployment rate. Those counties with higher unemployment rates receive a lower interest rate. The highest unemployment rates in the state will have a 1% interest rate for the entire 20-year term. Those that have a lower unemployment rate would have a little bit higher. Nobody pays any more than 75% of the cost of funds in the PENNVEST program. That's the max that we would charge, is 75% of the cost of funds. So in this case, since the project encompassed multiple counties, we ended up using the highest unemployment rate as we do in any other applicant, be it a municipal wastewater plant or drinking water plant. We use the highest unemployment rate of the counties impacted, and that happened to be Cameron County. So that ended up being, that's where the 1%, I've heard that a lot, you know, why the 1%? That's the most we can charge in Cameron County is 1% for 20 years. Each project is also included in has a technical review completed and recommended by DEP in regard to water quality impact. And the Department of Community and Economic Development reviews and gives us a recommendation on each project based on job creation and private investment. They're also required to provide documentation that they're compliant with county planning and land use goals. So Lime Timber requested $50 million from PENNVEST, and we had the capacity to fund roughly half of it at the October 11th board meeting. The benefits of the project include numerous headwater streams, many of which are designated as exceptional value or high quality. It addresses the legacy acid mine drainage and creates over 50 forestry jobs and additional spin-off jobs that they couldn't actually put a handle on right then. We were able to leverage substantial private investment and improve forest management through the sustainable timbering practices and forest certification. Now, the project was initially deferred by the PENNVEST board pending additional information to the satisfaction of the board members. The board met again on October 27th, and the project was unanimously approved. Now, that October approval, we were looking to leverage $115 million by our $25 million investment. Lime Timber's model didn't think that they could actually move forward with the project like that, and they wanted to come in and they were going to reduce the scope of the project, or come in and try to obtain additional funding to complete the original project scope. So they came in and were considered for our January 31st board meeting. It followed the same process as the first one. And they're currently, that's answered one of the questions actually, and they were approved at our January meeting. They're currently working through the settlement process. So the final terms that whatever DCNR comes up with as far as what we need to have in place, as far as requirements for the easements, what we're going to have in place as far as the collateral for the loan, the final terms of that will be negotiated between now and I think June is they're anticipating completing the settlement process. So the money's been approved by the board, but as every project would have, there's a settlement process where they come up with actual costs. They would come into a settlement process and do a drawdown once they've met all of the requirements. So the project had stalled before due to high private financing for all of it. They didn't think that they could make the project work. The $50 million in PENNVEST subsidized financing helped push it off into an area that would actually be something that they could work with that would make sense for them as a business entity and still makes sense for us in order to support what we're doing here with water quality and economic development. PENNVEST has the statutory authority to fund projects which include the acquisition of real property when doing so furthers the mission of PENNVEST. That mission is to fund projects that protect or improve water quality to the citizens of Pennsylvania and promote economic development. This project helps accomplish those things and addresses legacy acid mine drainage issues. We were able to add the economic benefits of supporting the hardwood lumber industry with a projected roughly 10 to 12 million board feet of hardwood saw timber, I think was another one of the questions, and 80,000 tons of pulpwood. In addition to protecting and improving water quality, creating jobs, providing raw materials for the lumber industry, the Commonwealth will obtain a return on our financial investment, as these are, remember, are not grant funds, rather a loan to be repaid over time at county cap rates, supporting the revolving nature of the fund by making the repayment of principal and interest available to other projects in the future. That's kind of the neat thing about, I think, one of the things I'm really a big fan of the revolving loan process is it feeds itself. It's helped perpetuate the fund in order to make money available for other projects as we move forward. So as this money gets repaid, we're going to have that money out for other eligible activities as it comes through. I got to tell you, we have a less than 0.5% default rate on the program. We tie projects up fairly well so that if they have an issue, we're sure to get our funds back. There's a whole host of, and again, I'm not sure what everybody got, but there was a whole host of, I think, 15 support letters that were included in the packet. The County Conservation District, where the acid mine drainage project is being built, the county planning offices, all those folks are in that packet as well. The other thing I'm not going to go through is the project summary. The last page of my handout talks about what the overall benefits that we had and picked up from DEP and presented to the board. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions after I get a drink.
Thank you for the information. The overarching question here is this the best use of public resources? Is this an eligible project? Where does the funding come from? That's a question that I hear often, and I know that it's coming from the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, which, as you stated, comes from EPA or from the federal government. And looking at the requirements from the federal side of it and doing a little bit of research, it looks like a project like this would qualify under the federal side.
Correct.
Because it specifically says state programs have the flexibility to direct funding to their particular environmental needs. In addition, Each state program may have its own statutes, rules, and regulations that guide project eligibilities. So then that in turn caused me to go and look at the PENNVEST law, because to see what requirements are under our own state statutes. And under the state PENNVEST law, the key seems to be the definition of a project. You know, what is a project? And it says, the eligible costs associated with the acquisition, construction, improvement, expansion, extension, repair, rehabilitation, or security measures of all or part of any facility or system. So to be eligible as a project, you have to be part of a facility or system.
The Act also stipulates that the PENNVEST program can do what's necessary to implement the Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund from EPA and the standards from that. So the EPA standards that come through with those funds, we administer those funds in accordance with how EPA does.
But it still has to be eligible as a project under state law to enable PENNVEST to move forward with the project.
Correct.
You may be in compliance with the federal law, but you still have to be in compliance with the state law for PENNVEST to administer those funds for this purpose. And that seems to be a little bit of a gray area under the information provided as to whether that would actually qualify as a legitimate state project in my reading of the statute. I looked at the application that Lime Timber submitted to PENNVEST, and some of the things stuck out to me, like they asked questions on the application like, does the applicant own the system? And Lime answered yes. I'm not sure what system they own, but they answered yes. Does the applicant operate the system? They answered yes. Does the applicant maintain the system? They answered yes. Does the applicant construct the system? They answered yes. Does the applicant charge residential or commercial user fees? They answered yes. And those all seem to be obscure, responses based on a project of this type. How could they answer yes to those questions when they don't own any system? They don't seem to apply in any way.
Well, the system itself, I suspect they were thinking of overall, but you need, Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a function of some of our online system, that you have to answer some of those questions in order to open up the next window. Is that a fair statement?
That is correct.
So we're using a little bit of gray matter as we read through there, and we understand that there's not a system in place. They weren't funded based on that they had a system or that they operated a system or any of that. They were based on what the water quality benefits were. We're somewhat restrictive in how we put together our online funding application. You can't have one size fits all for everybody, so we have certain things that open and close as you move through it. And this is, again, the first one of these types of projects that we've had, so we've had to be able to work with them in order to get them through the process, to be able to review them.
And I understand these questions are based on water and sewer projects.
Generally, that's correct.
That's
right.
what you do. I mean, that's what everyone sitting around this table knows, that those are primarily the projects you do. And this is an area that you've never been involved in before.
That's correct.
But it also brings even more questions to the table if this particular applicant is answering questions like this, just saying, yes, they have a system, yes, they're doing this. We're reading the definitions of a project, and to be honest with you, there's real question as to whether they qualify as a project under state law.
I can tell you, we've had our chief counsel review whether or not we can fund these projects and many of those ag projects within the realm of what our state statute does, and she has indicated that we can. Now, I can get you that opinion, I probably should, so that we can quash that argument at this point, because that's, yeah.
I would like to have that so that we can further pursue that line of questioning.
Sure.
Thank you.
Very good.
Representative Keller?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we've talked about this, and you referred to it also here, the fact of water quality, and of the 60,000 acres that we're looking at here, what percentage of that does the acid mine stream consist of?
Oh, I think that's a relatively small portion, mostly in Cameron County, it's all in Cameron County, right?
Correct.
I couldn't tell you the exact percentage, but it's a relatively small percentage, I can tell you that.
Okay, so we're doing, mostly everything points to cleaning up the acid mine.
Well, that's part of it. No, actually, I think the benefit is the protection of the timber land. That's the advantage of it, and I think it's the acid mine drainage that is added in as an extra bonus for that.
Okay, all right, fine, thank you.
Representative Kavulich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It says that this is a model that's been used successfully in other states. Did PENNVEST look at that, and are there any specific examples, or can you tell us a little bit about how successful this was in other areas?
Well, New York City, yes. We routinely speak with other states that administer revolving loan funds very similar to what ours. Each state is similar in nature, but yet different, unique to their own states. New York State has a couple examples. I think there's some examples in the handouts that are in there where they actually used the fund to protect the watershed for New York City, for instance, reducing the level that they had to treat the water that goes into New York City by purchasing of acreage within the watershed. Virginia comes to mind, that they purchased an area for watershed protection within the Natural Bridge area of Virginia, and that's all worked out fairly well. They're using revenues in the Natural Bridge area generated from the tourist industry for some of it, and using some other revenues to pay that debt back. There are two that come to mind right off the top of my head.
Has it been financially successful in those states?
Everybody that I know of is in repayment mode, so that's the extent that I talk to other states about that. I don't delve into the intricacies of it, but I have talked to them enough to make sure that it was something that we weren't going to get so far in that we would be sorry that we did. So yeah, they've had success with it, and mainly because it's actually, I know this is a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but it's actually a less expensive way to achieve some of those benefits of water quality than if you build a treatment plant everywhere and had to have somebody there try to help that.
Thank you.
Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Johnson, for being here today. I appreciate your testimony before the committee. Timber's a natural resource, and you had mentioned the qualifications here that are being used are the improvement of water quality and economic development. So I think this might be a stretch, but maybe not. If a coal company, if Massey Energy came to Pennsylvania and said, we'd like to buy a coal mine, and there's a remediation project on the property that needs to happen from coal mining that happened in the past, we'll take care of that, and we'll put an easement on the surface. Would the Commonwealth, would PENNVEST entertain a loan in that situation to purchase that coal mine, for a private entity to purchase that coal mine?
You'd have to purchase the coal mine, probably, I don't know. I'd have to know the details of it. I couldn't answer that. I can tell you that we have funded a project that closed an abandoned strip mine that had, that actually they made the, the Pittsburgh Botanic Garden down there now. But we had money in that project where we actually helped close. They had 2 acid mine drainage sites, and it was an abandoned mine that they converted to a botanic garden, and they actually have a pretty brisk clientele through there. And as they did that, though, they did have to remine a portion of the area, sell the coal, and that helped pay some of the expenses that we did not pay for.
So, and just to be clear, I believe my example is farcical on its face, right? I don't think PENNVEST should be in the business of helping a privately owned coal company buy a coal mine, even if there is a remediation project. Maybe the remediation project very specifically would be of interest to PENNVEST. But what we have here is, I hate to say it's the same thing, coal and timber are not the same thing, but they're both natural resources, they're both private companies, and in the example I set up, they both have a remediation issue, and they're both putting forward a conservation easement. My second question, which I asked previously, and they suggested that you might be able to shed some light here. My question is that we're talking about what could be framed as a $50 million, 1% loan, no bid deal. How was Lime chosen? And we've learned that there was an application completed. Was this application publicly available to multiple bidders, to multiple private outfits? How was Lime chosen specifically for this deal?
We didn't choose Lime. Lime chose to come to PENNVEST. It's like you're applying for a car loan. I don't know. But the bank, I guess the banks do come, people wanting to sell you a car loan, but it's more like they had a project, like anybody would have a project. If it was a municipality, came to PENNVEST and said, we're looking to implement this project, could you help finance us? And like we would any project, if it was an ag project that came in to put a best management practice or a manure management within their site, private entity, or even if it was for instance, we funded GTE, we funded Sony Corporation to put wastewater treatment plants in. They came to us. We didn't seek them out and said, here's some money, take it. I don't know how a solicitation process would work from my end to get people. It's not like I had the 60,000 acres that I wanted to sell. They had found a project and brought it to us for funding.
So in the example of, for example, a manufacturer who comes and says, I'll put in X hundred jobs if we can get the wastewater treatment cleaned up, I see that as a little bit of a different issue here. Again, we're talking for a project of that magnitude, it might be $1 million, might be less, might be more. But we're talking about a substantial, my understanding, am I correct in that this is the largest loan in PENNVEST's history?
That's not correct.
Is it one of the largest loans in PENNVEST?
One of the larger loans, yes.
Yes, so we're talking about a substantial sum. So we had some questions with DCNR about public access. I would think that if we're offering, again, we're talking about $50 million. If we put it out there and say, hey, timber companies of the world, timber companies of Pennsylvania, here's an offer we're willing to put forward, $50 million, 1%, et cetera. What are you going to give us in return? Maybe we could have gotten a better deal than, well, we'll remediate this one stream that apparently is very little of the property, and public access, which I might add, everyone loves public access. My understanding is that for farmland preservation, we have several categories. One of them is called agricultural reserve. That's if you own 12 acres and you're not really actively farming it, but you get the clean and green discount. Technically, that ground is public access. Nobody knows that. It's the law. But, if your neighbor has 12 acres and they're enrolled in clean and green, you can go over and have a barbecue in their backyard and they can't do anything about it. That's public access. And we've learned in this deal that the terms of the public access have not been finalized. So we could end up with public access that's, I don't know, the same as me having a barbecue in my neighbor's yard where he has 12 acres.
The terms of public access will be finalized as part of the settlement agreement. Everything's tied up. Everything's tied up as the way that, however DCNR determines the easement to what shape that should take, what public access is necessary, we're going to put in the final loan agreement we have with them. We have the approval. That's what's done so far. The rest of it is, the devil's in the details.
Well, yes, particularly when $50 million is on the line. How long does Lime have to hold this ground? Could they resell it?
It's a 20-year loan. We're structuring the deal such that if Lime is out, we're out. They pay us off. So if they sell tomorrow, the day after we close, then they pay us the $50 million back that day. My sense is that by looking at the industry, as we've looked at different things that are out there, these large tracts like this tend to cycle out every 10 years or so. So if it cycles out in 10 years and Lime decides to divest themselves of the property, they'll pay us the balance of whatever isn't paid.
Now, what about the mineral rights?
One of the first questions I ask Lime Timber when I talk to them is about the mineral rights, because the first question I ask folks when they come in to borrow money is, how are you going to pay me back? And that's one of the things that they do, is if you have mineral rights to do it. And the first thing is, if you have mineral rights, you're going to generate revenues, maybe you don't need PENNVEST anyway. So the first thing I asked them was that. Their answer was, we're not interested in the mineral rights. As far as they know, that there are no mineral rights involved with this. They're only interested in the surface rights. That's what they told me. That's what we're running with, because I have no reason not to believe that, particularly since the other investigation that goes with this is related to having the rights severed for the easement.
What do you mean rights severed for the easement?
The conservation easement. They're looking into those conservation easements and to see who owns the mineral rights for those. And they're finding that they are not being sold with the surface rights.
On this parcel or some other separate deal?
As part of this 60,000 acre, I think it's 9,000 acres that are part of the conservation.
I understand that small part. I guess the question I have, and forgive me, I'm in Chester County, mineral rights don't often come up, so this is not my bailiwick, so forgive me. But my understanding is in the heady days that we saw a couple years ago, landowners in Tioga County were offered $5,000 an acre just to sign up for Marcellus shale drilling. Now, those days have cooled off a little bit. And I understand that much of the Allegheny National Forest, there's drilling that occurs there because so the rights have been severed, and part of the ground, the ground is owned by the federal government, but the mineral rights are privately owned. So I understand that there's a question here. But if even 10% of the 60,000 acres, if even 10% of it, they retain the mineral rights, that's 6,000 acres. At a $5,000 an acre sign-on bonus, that's $30 million. And to accept on face value from a nonprofit, a land conservancy, a corporate entity, my own mother, frankly, to accept on we're not really very interested in those mineral rights. Yeah, I don't know. We're not interested in them. That just seems ludicrous to me. I just cannot believe that there wouldn't be some question asked somewhere. In other words, I'm not trying to lay any bad intentions at the feet of Lime or DCNR or PENNVEST or anybody else. Okay, but a company from outside the state approaches the state and says, hey, we'd like to buy this 60,000 acres. Would you give us $50 million? 1% interest? We're not giving it to you, you're lending it to us. Would you lend us that kind of money? Yeah, okay, yeah, we'll lend it to you. What are we going to get out of the deal? We're going to clean up this stream and we're going to put on some public access, which we don't really have that defined yet. Okay, fine. Meanwhile, they've done their homework and there's X million dollars of mineral rights on the property. I just can't believe nobody from the state or from DCNR has apparently even gone down this road. Those rights could be worth millions. You would think DCNR, maybe, if I were DCNR or PENNVEST, I would have written into the deal as part of us lending the you're going to be the owner of this property, as part of giving you this $50 million at 1% loan, we want the mineral rights, the state, so we make sure there's no drilling on the property, or we collect it for the oil and gas lease fund, or whatever it is. You would think that would have been on the table, that if there's any, you could even write it into the deal, maybe you could even write it into it now. If it's discovered that you own any of the mineral rights and they have not been severed, they will revert to the Commonwealth.
That's a good suggestion. I mean, my goal is to get the money back, so the more money they get, if it's mineral rights or whatever, then we get paid back sooner. So that's a good suggestion. I'll take that to our council.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Diamond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir, for your testimony. Appreciate it. I just want to clarify something I mentioned before. I thought that the deal was about $165 million. According to your testimony that you provided on paper, it's about $141 million.
I think that's correct.
Okay, so that brings the per acre price down to about $2,350 rather than $2,750, as I said before. Two topics of two lines of questioning here. The first is about the watershed. Is this all in the Allegheny Rivershed or watershed, or is part of it in the Susquehanna as well?
Part of it's in the Chesapeake Bay, the other part's in the Ohio Bay.
Okay, thank you. And in your testimony, you said that this includes some streams of exceptional value and high quality. So when you say high quality, is that the same kind of talk when we hear that, like, here's some streams that are impaired, these are high quality? Is that kind of the same?
There are some streams that have not been impacted, and they are high-quality fisheries, I believe.
Okay.
In terms that they'll support a certain amount of trout or whatever.
So they're in good shape as opposed to an impaired stream that's not?
That's correct.
Okay. So that leads me to just a different topic on PENNVEST front. Is this money, is PENNVEST money available for the MS4 projects that the farmers in my area are now going to have to shell out $8,000, $12,000 a year to pay for?
Absolutely.
It is?
Yes.
So a municipality can come to PENNVEST and say, we would like a 20-year loan, or whatever structure.
I think I've got $100 and some odd million worth of that already out there in MS4s.
Okay.
My real dream is to get a big box store to work with the municipality, come in with a project to green up their big box store to the benefit of the municipal MS4 permit.
Okay.
Helps everybody.
All right.
I've got the big box store on the hook to pay me back.
That's good to know, and I'm going to take that back to my municipalities, because
I appreciate it.
I just attended a meeting for my township where, for me as a homeowner, it's going to be $40 a year. I don't care, but there's some farmers that are going to be paying a whole lot of money, and especially with what's going on in the dairy industry. Now, I want to talk about the dollars themselves. The dollars come from. These $50 million came from, how did they get in your hands to be able to loan out?
The federal government used to have what they call the construction grants program, where they provided up to 75% grants to municipalities to construct wastewater treatment plants, collection systems, whatever. Under Reagan, they actually phased that out, and they came in with, they started thinking about this revolving loan program. They didn't want to cut the states off cold, so they began to offer, said, hey, states, we'll help you capitalize a revolving loan fund to make low-interest loans to municipalities to clean up the water, keep the good work going. It also includes what they call 319 projects, which are those non-point sorts of activities, like that are on farms, things that see improvements along the streams. So that money comes from EPA, appropriated through Congress. EPA Region 3 administers that in Pennsylvania. We get roughly, I think this year we're looking at $67 million to receive from EPA for those sorts of activities. We put that money into PENNVEST, we loan it out, the interest rate money that comes back to us comes back in to loan out again. It's grant money to us from EPA, we loan it out. There are some requirements that EPA has with that, of course, not just that go on the end user for wage rates or whatever, but there are requirements that we use a certain portion of it as green. This fulfills some of our green, most of our green requirement for a while. It required that we have so much that are used in distressed areas. They have different requirements that follow that money all the way through.
Okay.
Anyway, that's where it comes
and in your testimony, you said can't charge more than 75% of the cost. So can you tell me what the cost is? What actually costs money to get this money?
It is, that formula is based off the latest state bond issue. So I can't charge any more than 75% of the latest state bond issue.
Okay.
That's the most I can charge in any county.
Okay. And one final question about the dollars. Can the General Assembly stop the distribution of these funds?
We made a commitment. I'd have to talk to my attorney. I don't know what the commitment is. I know what a commitment is, obviously, but I'm not sure what legal ramifications that would take if we pulled back from that we have out there. It's just an offer at this point.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Delicio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In no particular order, thank you for using gray matter to leverage a gray area. Both those phrases were used during the course of testimony, and I had the opportunity to do that probably about 25 years ago as it pertained to senior housing and services. We saw a gray area as it pertained to what dollars had been traditionally used for, but felt that the interpretation of that could be broadened. And we were successful in doing that, and a lot of good came of it. It was precedent-setting and blazed the way. And during that process, I learned that the lending agencies, like a PENNVEST, which were both federal, state, and local. So there was a lot of bureaucracy here to navigate over a relatively short period of time. You know, there are pretty serious clawback positions, clawback issues, so that if money is loaned inappropriately, those entities would be on the hook. My organization would have been on the hook. Is there same type of clawback here if it were to be found subsequently that the EPA thought this hadn't been used appropriately?
We're holding a first mortgage on this. We have a bank letter credit for not all of it, but for a good chunk of it, a full bank letter credit. We have other provisions that are following through there. So I'm confident that we're adequately secured, or will be by the time we finalize this deal.
And without the mineral rights question answered, because I think for anybody watching, for a minute there, it almost sounded as if the Commonwealth was the current landowner, where the Commonwealth is the lender only in this, and whether or not a sort of bonus on top of the formula that has been dictated to you that you have to use could be negotiated if that $50 million were to leverage, I guess, a bit of a windfall for the potential new owner, is for PENNVEST to figure out if that you have the ability to do that and if it makes sense to do that.
My sense is that these guys are a little bit closer to the edge than what they wanted to be with the deal that they have, with everything that's going on. They did commit to put the conservation easement in. They did commit to put the other acid mine drainage remediation work in. But I don't mind bringing that up and trying to work that in. Again, my job is to make sure that we're funding projects with water quality benefit, and we get the money back in to loan back out again. That's what I consider my job. So that's where we are.
To that end, I also, for anybody listening, PENNVEST has a board of directors.
That's correct.
Not unlike the Commonwealth Financing Agency. This is all under the auspices of DCED as opposed to DCNR. And that, you know, these votes, I assume these votes are public. I haven't been able to pull them up very quickly on my handheld here. But I know I am asked often to write letters of support on behalf of organizational constituents in my district that are applying for funds, particularly right now multimodal under CFA. Is that similar? I mean, the letters here were all from commissioners and other types of entities, county commissioners, for this particular project, but there may very well be letters of support from members of the minority and majority parties for this project.
Well, we happen to have a board member with us today. Representative Oberlander is one of our board members as well. And but I think this was vetted out fairly well amongst the caucuses. That's one of the reasons that the project was delayed for a bit, just to make sure everybody was comfortable with it.
Was on board.
The county letters we get for every project, because we want to make sure the project's consistent with local land use plans.
Okay.
If there's an ag preservation board and it could be a possible impact of that, we want to make sure that they're consistent with that. So the planning letters and the land use letters we get for every project. So it wasn't a surprise that we had those counties' letters in there. I just wanted to be sure to share them with the board, that they had, each of the counties had looked at that, and the municipality where the acid mine drainage work is being done signed off on the land use for that as well.
Appreciate that, Mr. Johnson. And then, too, for those watching, these board of directors are made up of members of both the House and the Senate from both parties, from both caucuses as well, so they could go online and see who serves as that. Is this, and this will be my last question. Is this, you said you have a position, where is this position of this loan behind any other lender? Is this what I've referred to in my career in long-term care as a soft second, meaning repayment is only as a result of like positive cash flow, which could be defined very creatively, or is this position, which would be interesting to see if it's equal to another lender, a private sector lender? Usually a public sector lender takes a position at the back end.
You can't have a default rate of less than 0.5% if you take a soft position on a lot of stuff that we do. We have a mortgage on a real estate. We have the letter of credit, again, not for all of it, but for a major chunk of it. And we also have the guarantees of the on up the food chain. The Lime is owned, has, I don't know, 4 or 5 owners. We're moving up that guarantee chain. We couldn't go get the guarantee of some of those major funds that they also have. They manage funds from major insurance companies and those folks, and they kind of leverage some of that money into this. They wouldn't let us go that far, but we were able to get up the food chain far enough where I'm convinced that I know that if they decide to leave, that I can tap those guarantees to be sure we get paid back.
Well, and I did hear you iterate that as a default rate, and that is outstanding, because that is a great return, well, a great use of public sector money, that it goes out and comes in. I'm not too sure that happens with every program that's administered. And so that is excellent. And again, I applaud sort of the gray matter leveraging the gray area, because we need that to be successful in the Commonwealth. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Mao.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian, do you know if you, as in PENNVEST, know of any projects for sewer or water authorities, boroughs, townships, et cetera, or even MS4 that have been turned down in the past year or two?
No, there haven't been any.
Every single one gets funded?
In the last year or two. I think the last time, because I think that was a question that floated around here, right? I wanted to know when it was. I knew it had been a while, but didn't know exactly. We had deferred 3 projects in 2015. 2 of them received funding at the next board meeting. The other one did not come back in. I don't know what happened to it. But there were 3 projects. That was the last time we deferred anybody, was 2015.
Now, do those go out mainly as grants or mainly as loans?
Well, most of the money we have is loan money, so it's fair to say that it's probably loan. We have about $60 million in grant money for any given year, and we approve about $300 million in loan money. So most of the money we have is loan. I don't know in particular those 3. I'm sorry, I don't remember those. But
that's all right. I'll have my townships and boroughs be in touch immediately.
Please do. Please do. Absolutely. Absolutely do. Particularly water projects. People are slow to bring water projects in right now.
MS4 has...
Well, MS4 is the next big nut for us to crack, and I think we're going to figure it out. But again, with a little bit of grant money, it doesn't go very far for the MS4 work. But the MS4 work isn't that expensive in some cases.
My township's $400,000 a year right now.
Is that right?
Yeah. MS4 is killing us.
I'd like to talk to them. I really would. I'd like to get.
Believe me, I'm gonna send them your way. Thank you very much.
We need to get them in the loop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Bloom.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Brian. So just real quickly going back, 2 questions, but the first one is going back to what the chairman brought up at the beginning of Lime answering yes to questions that were on the application form that were not clearly actually yes. Answering no instead of, was no available? Could they have answered no?
Is it? Yeah.
I mean, doesn't it seem like it would make more sense if they didn't fit the criteria that they should have been answering no?
I suppose. I mean, what we don't want to do is have the process hold up at what would otherwise be a good project. So we're always very mindful of not letting the process screw something up.
That same rule would apply to a municipality coming in asking for some sort of funding for a project that didn't quite fit the criteria of being a project. a municipality could count on that same indulgence.
And, oh yeah, absolutely. And what we do is everybody that applies, within a week of when they apply, we send a correspondence back to them saying, we reviewed your application and everything looks great, don't call us, we'll call you. Or we reviewed your application and, hey, you put yes here and it doesn't make sense. Okay. So they have an opportunity to go back and make that modification so that we have a clear picture of what the project is and what we can do to help them.
Okay. My other question, thank you. My other question is really, throughout the whole process here, in this particular case, the Lime project, was there any third party, other than through the support letters, but was there any third party advocating for the project other than Lime, whether that be communicating either publicly or privately by an entity or an individual or private industry or government?
To the extent that you have those support letters, that's the only experience I have with anybody.
For example, the Wolf administration wasn't actively advocating?
Nobody talked to me about it from there anyway.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
I'm sorry I missed your call the other month ago.
Well, me too. Maybe we can make up for that. I'm going to try to be brief because I know we have other testifiers. Let me get down in the weeds just a little bit with you. You've established you have a first mortgage position and correct. Letters of credit and guarantees, and those all seem to be in keeping with banking as I understand it. Did you do the obvious? Did you say what happens if there's a default? What's our next move if Lime goes bankrupt or just pulls out of the project?
Yes. The first thing you do is pull the bank letter of credit to buy us time to see what we're going to do with the property. If we hold, because that's at least enough money to make the payments if we have to sell it, if we have to take ownership of the property and resell it, we can do that. The other thing I didn't mention is we also have a lien on the revenue stream that they're going to have. We have a lien on, because they're going to be selling, the timber products. We have a lien on that as well.
Okay. I went to the internet. I'm not great with the internet, but I went there to try to find out financial data on the company. It's privately owned, so that was not readily available. I'm guessing they gave you that information to help you make your decision.
That's correct.
Yeah. Can I get a copy of that in my official capacity?
I think it's all public information.
Okay.
I think you can. Dave's making a note of that. Sure.
Thank you, Dave. Counting on you. When does the principal and interest payment begin? Immediately, or is there?
They'll begin interest payments as soon as they receive the funds. They'll begin interest payments. We're deferring some principal up front because it's going to take them a while to get rolling. I don't really know the time frame exactly, but we're deferring some principal payments for a period of time until they get operational.
Would you care to hazard a guess? Are we talking a year, 5 years?
Was it? It's 5 years.
5 years, okay. So in the open market, prime now is 4.5%. So in year one, these folks are saving $1.7 million by getting our 1% excellent rate, which kind of takes the bloom off the rose on some of these other projects for me. The $700,000 you're talking about for the remediation of the mine acid drainage and the easement and that sort of thing. So that means they're making, help me with the math, something like $8 million right off the bat for the first 5 years in this deal. I'm trying to determine where the public benefits by a deal like this. It seems extremely preferential. Leading me to my next question, it's been indicated that there may be another loan or loans in your pipeline. Is that a correct statement? And if so, what is happening?
We have a pending application from another similar project in Elk County.
Okay. And the amount is approximately?
$20 million.
Okay. So there's a trend developing here.
There's at least interest in
How deep are your pockets? How many resources have you in order to do deals like this?
It depends on the traditional projects, frankly. If I have traditional projects, they're going to take front and center on it. If I don't have traditional projects, for instance, the first round of this that we had funded, I didn't have traditional projects They were the next rung on the ladder, and I had the capacity to fund them, and it made more sense to make use of the money than not. So that's what we did. Now, it so happens that it was in again, Cameron County, 1% county, not a 3% county or whatever, but it's, it is where it is. So, yes, I'm sorry.
Well, no, that's fine, and I'm kind of coming to the end then. I said I'd be brief, but I guess I haven't been. So I'm hearing, I don't have the list of loan applicants that you may have at your disposal, but I'm hearing from different of my colleagues that there are municipalities out there with water and sewer projects that either have not or are not being funded. Is that true, or is that incorrect?
We have funded everybody that's darkened our door, except for those 3 that we deferred in 2015 that were funded in subsequent round. And I got to tell you, I mean, I also travel in circles with USDA funds that are out there, with other non-grant related funds, and even the bond market is down after they did all the refinancings at the end of last year. So there is a slowing down of water and sewer projects right this minute, I guess.
Okay.
So anyway, the answer to your question is we have not funded, that's a double negative, doesn't make sense. We have not funded any projects for these or any project. I mean, everybody has received an offer. Now, what I hear from a lot of people is that you didn't give me grant money. That there are people that we don't give grant money to because of our financial capacity analysis. I'll fully admit to that.
Okay.
But they did receive a funding offer.
Okay.
They say the last time we didn't fund it was 2015, and there for a long time in the program. I mean, I've been with the program since '88. So with a long time with the program, we funded maybe half to 2/3 of the list of projects, and we would routinely defer projects. In 2009, under ERA, we funded $1 billion worth of projects due to extra federal support, a little extra state money in there, and we funded $1 billion worth of projects that year. And I think that kind of brought the trough down a little bit. It got a lot of projects out of the way that people weren't looking to fund. And even that year, though we funded that much, there was probably about 1/3 more projects that were looking to try to receive funds.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative James. Representative Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your testimony. It's good to hear first position, collateral, pre-approval. I guess my concern would be your forecast with the pending MS4. It seems like, at least what we're hearing from some of our municipalities and townships, that these are some costly projects, and it's great to learn that there could be a connection. Can you just touch on if we have a couple of major players doing 50, 20, these large-scale multi-million deals, are our smaller projects, 800,000, 400,000, going to get pinched out? Or, are you hedging your bets for what will be coming over the next year?
Actually, by making some of these larger loans, ensuring that there's going to be repayment stream in there, kind of helps the long-term forecast for the program, because you're generating the principal and interest repayment over a period of time. You know that some of the investments that the Commonwealth have had, just because the market has shown the interest rates are relatively low anyway. So we're making the investments in the municipalities, in the systems, bringing that money back in some cases a little bit more than what they would have had we invested it someplace else. The answer is, I think we can, since the MS4 work isn't all going to happen at the same time, because there's going to be phased over a period of time, I think we are in a position that we can address those needs. The problem is that will have to be in low-interest loan. I mean, and a lot of the MS4 people that I talk to are saying, I can't do it unless you give me a grant. Well, we don't have that much grant money. I'm glad to do it in loan. That's what's kind of neat about this project, is I'm doing a green MS4 type project. It's a non-point source as a loan. I got to tell you, there's not a whole lot of those out there that are willing to step up and let me borrow money to do a non-point source project. And that's one of the reasons I thought it was kind of neat to try to work on this one.
Yeah, if I was crunching the numbers, it would be, this project we're testifying today is about a $4 million.
I think we're going to get about $5 million
out of this at the end of the time.
You know,
Right.
and then that will be recycled in as leverage against some of these other smaller
The
projects.
original
as they're
50
coming down.
plus the additional $5 million, that's right. I mean, the money's coming, but we're going to get $55 million back into the program with this project.
Thank you, thank you. I see where you're going.
Representative Fee?
I just want to follow up on that, because that was really what my question about, because I'm from Lancaster County, as mine are all working on their MS4s, and I swear there's a big bullseye on their backs. But I know how much it's costing them coming up. But when you just said something that, you said the MS4s are being phased in. Like, my municipalities are all due right now in the next 5 years. They have to all reduce by 10%. So what did you mean by
That's because
that?
of where you are. There are other counties in the state, there are other municipalities in the state that don't have to do that quite as quickly.
Okay,
depending
so
on
it's
where
done
they
on the county basis. So I guess that was my point, is I'm looking at 50 million going out, and you're talking about another 20 million going out. I thought it's critical at this time to make sure there is money there for my municipalities coming up.
Well, I got to tell you, Lancaster County, the city of Lancaster is one of the projects I like to talk about a lot, actually. We funded that as a low-interest loan to the city to do a series of green infrastructure projects across the city. They're converting roadways or alleys to pervious pavement, redoing some of the streets, they're putting green roofs on, and they're incentivizing the private establishments to do that, either churches or individuals to install those things. They're using PENNVEST money. They're giving the individual in the form of a 90% grant to do that, and they're paying back all that money to PENNVEST as part of their stormwater fee. So the local has to put in some money, and then everybody pays a stormwater fee, and it replenishes the fund for the next city that wants to do that. I mean, I can't be a bigger proponent of the revolving nature of this thing, and I think that Lancaster is way ahead of the game as far as trying to implement those sorts of activities so that it makes it a livable place for them. Thank you.
I guess the last question's mine. I want to know more about the project that's pending. You said that it's a $20 million project. What can you tell us about the project? Where is it located? How many acres? Who's the applicant?
I don't know all that stuff off the top of my head. I know it's around Johnsonburg. It's in Elk County. It's a much smaller acreage, obviously. Well, maybe it isn't obvious, but it's a smaller acreage. I mean, I can get you who the applicant is and that. I just don't know that off the top of my head.
You don't know how many acres?
No, I definitely don't know that.
But you know it's $20 million.
I do remember the money. I do.
And you don't remember the applicant?
It's a conservation group, but I don't remember I mean, I can get you the name of it. It's not an outside, it's not a, it's not a lime timber. It's a conservancy.
And is that planned to be on the agenda for the next PENNVEST meeting?
It's in that we're reviewing them all right now. It's not, we haven't developed the agenda, so I'm not sure if we have to get all the information that we request, the local sign-offs and all that kind of stuff. If that doesn't show up, we won't take it.
And is there a forest conservation easement planned as part of that?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I don't know enough about that project.
Can you get us a copy of the application?
I don't, frankly, I don't know that that we traditionally share the applications at this point while it's under review. I can share some of the information, like who they are and the amount and county and that kind of stuff, but I think the meat of the application is still I don't know, my attorney has some name for it, work product or something, but that we wouldn't normally share until.
At what point can you share it?
Once there's an action by the board. For instance, if we don't take it to the board, then that's a board action, then you would have it available at that point. If we do take it to the board, then it's a board action, you can have it then. But when it's in the application stage, it's a little, she's gone, but a little bit of a gray area. And our attorneys have historically said that that's not something that we would share in a right-to-know request because it's work product.
But you haven't taken it to the board yet.
Oh, absolutely not.
So you should be able to share it.
I can share it, if we take it to the board, I can share it once the board takes an action on it. That's
But
the exciting thing.
it seems as though the public, you're using public resources, it seems as though the public should have a right to see the applicant or the application before it's acted on by the board, so that we can evaluate whether we think it's a good deal or not.
I'm just telling you what my solicitor has advised me on other requests we've had for pending applications. I'd be happy to revisit it with her.
If you could, because,
Certainly.
it's something that we would like to see. We're talking at length about two projects that have been approved, $50 million, 60,000 acres, but if there's going to be projects going forward, it would be nice if the members and the public would be able to see what those projects are before they're actually approved, so that we can evaluate for ourselves if they're a good deal or not.
Sure. It may be, it may be I can take parts or chunks out of the application, or even ask the applicant to contact you directly. If they give it to you, that's different than if I do. I don't have any vested interest in not sharing it, other than I want to just make sure I'm treating everybody equally. And I don't treat applicants as a final act until, the board has taken an action. So I don't mind, in fact, I'll reach out to the applicant and see if, Mr. Chairman, have them contact you if you don't mind. If they're willing to share that, I'm happy to do that.
The applicant should definitely be treated fairly, but so should the taxpayer.
Don't disagree with that.
I believe. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next testifier is Keith Klingler. He's the president of Pennsylvania Landowners Association. And I have to apologize to our testifiers. We're running way behind schedule. There are way more questions than what I anticipated. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in this issue. And Mr. Klingler, thank you for joining us, and you're welcome to proceed.
Thank you for having me. And there will definitely be more questions, I guarantee you. My name is Keith Klingler. I own and manage 3,000 acres of timberland in 7 counties in northwest PA. I am a member of the PA Forest Products Association, the Venango County Planning Commission, PA Forest Stewardship Committee, president of PA Landowners Association, and the chairman of the Oil Creek Township Venango County Board of Supervisors. I have been involved in land use issues for 30 years and am uniquely qualified to speak on this issue. PENNVEST was initiated in 1988 with the legislative intent of funding municipal drinking water and public sewage and stormwater projects. This legislative intent, listed on pages 1 and 2 of the Act, are quite clear. If there has been any legislation to expand the scope and use of PENNVEST funds, I am not aware of it, and neither are the legislators. And I have that Act right here, and right on the very front page it says infrastructure, and under the first bullet point, under legislative intent, it says the health of millions of citizens of this Commonwealth is at risk due to substandard and deteriorated water supply and sewage disposal systems. No mention of land acquisition. My township was turned down by PENNVEST 3 consecutive years when we requested funding for a sewage project. I have those denials with me, by the way. We ended up turning to the federal RUS program. Our project was finally funded at 3% interest. This 1% loan, if our township would have had that, our residents would be paying $50 a month instead of $65 a month for their sewage bill. On the way down, I got a call from neighboring Corn Planter Township. Their interest under RUS is 3.25%. Probably would have knocked $20 to $30 off of their monthly bills. That's 2 townships in Venango County. How many more examples are there out there? I guarantee you there's a lot of them. And when you start thinking about the bigger picture of these residents and the money that they're losing because of these higher interest loans, that's being taken right out of the economy of Pennsylvania. And there could be hundreds of these type of examples out there. Lime Timber, a timber investment management organization, or TIMO, as we call them in the industry, based in New Hampshire, which owns hundreds of thousands of acres of land in 14 states. Recently received this $50.8 million PENNVEST loan at 1% interest with interest-only payments for the first 5 years. Their stated goal is to cut 88 to 104 million board feet of timber over the next 8 years on this 60,000 acres they are purchasing with help of this PENNVEST loan. I am told that these interest terms are even better than the municipal projects that PENNVEST has funded. And I want to bring up something that Mr. Johnson had said. He said we gave them that low interest rate because it's a depressed area economically. What does that have to do with lime timber? They're extremely wealthy. That is geared towards a municipality that's economically distressed, not towards an applicant like this. So to justify that 1% is just outrageous. Why would a company with a wealth of lime timber even be considered for a PENNVEST loan? When funding a land acquisition with a low-interest loan, PENNVEST is taking business away from private sector lenders. If Governor Wolf is promoting economic growth for Pennsylvania, government competing against existing companies is no way to accomplish this. Lime timber will save between $1.5 and $2 million per year with the terms of this loan, giving them a clear advantage over their competitors. And Lee, I appreciate the comments that you made, and $500,000 for an acid mine drainage project is peanuts when you're saving that kind of money. They have stated that the conventional funding would be, quote, too expensive, and that's in their narrative to PENNVEST. Could it be that the land was priced too high, and that's why it's been on the market for several years? And this idea that nobody wanted that land is crazy. It was just overpriced. If that land would have come down in price and the market would have worked, the timber companies that are there in the northern tier, they would have jumped on those lands if the price just came down a little bit. They all need to expand their timberland base to supply their mills. Manipulating the marketplace with subsidized loans creates an uneven playing field for the forest products industry. The reason there was little opposition to this loan is simply because so few people knew about it. With no media attention, no hearings, or scrutiny, DCNR, with the help of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and the Conservation Fund, were able to mislead our elected officials and push this lucrative deal through. The application that Lime Timber filled out to receive the loan needs to be thoroughly examined. All the questions on the applications seem related to the funding of municipal water and sewage projects, and that's already been mentioned. But two things I want to bring up. They say we're creating 50 construction jobs in the application. PENNVEST website press release says 50 forestry jobs. Which is it? Another question was concerning the system itself, and will you charge user fees to the commercial and residents? They answered yes. And the argument that, well, they had to do that to get to the next page is nonsense, because on the same page they answered NA for several questions. And at this point, I'd like to address the working forest conservation easement. That's a new term we're starting to hear. I'll tell you what, I asked on the Forest Stewardship Committee that deals with the Federal Forest Legacy Program, which is a federal program to fund conservation easements to forested land, is there any legal authority by the easement holder to force that landowner to manage timber in any certain way? And the answer was no. So to proclaim that this is working forests when there's no legal authority to force the landowner to ever harvest a tree or to harvest it in any certain manner, they could clear cut it and throw that management plan right in the trash, and there's nothing the easement holder can do. So to promote it as working forest is extremely misleading. I will now address, quote, forest fragmentation. This is a claim that DCNR, Lime Timber, and most conservancies and land trusts make. They state that these large forested tracts are being subdivided and developed at an unprecedented rate. But they offer no evidence to back up this claim. Having done some minor subdivisions, I am acutely aware of how stringent subdivision regulations are. DEP's on-lot sewage regulations alone would prohibit most of these large tracts from being subdivided. The terrain, lack of access, poor soils, and cost associated with major subdivisions at the county and state level would eliminate any chance of these tracts being subdivided and developed. Clean and Green is a program designed to give tax relief to landowners who don't plan on subdividing. This is a county-wide program that most counties in the northern tier participate in. Most, if not all, of Lime Timber's tracts are enrolled in Clean and Green, which already restrict development. And I've talked to multiple forest consultants who have worked these lands and know them inside and out. I did a quick survey of 7 counties to see how many tracts over 200 acres have been subdivided and developed over the past 10 years in the northern tier. Of the 5 that responded, and I just called them on Friday morning, by the way, of the 5 that responded, and I have the responses, 4 counties said there have been no subdivisions of parcels over 200 acres in the last 10 years. 1 county sent a list of 10 properties that had small parcels subdivided from a larger tract. Interestingly, the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy was one of the landowners who did the subdivision, and the Pennsylvania Game Commission purchased 5 parcels from a larger tract in one of the other subdivisions. Is the PGC and the WPC guilty of fragmentation? In all 10 cases, the subdivisions were less than 10% of the entire tract. In other words, 800-acre tract, or excuse me, 8,000-acre tract, they subdivided 20 acres. That type of thing is all we've seen. And in one case, less than an acre came off of a 4,000-acre tract. And one of these 10 was an expansion of a landfill. So that's for the public good. Now, we know that large forest tracts are not being subdivided and developed. What I have found is that forest land consolidation, and that's hopefully a term that you'll remember, is and has been occurring with thousands of examples. Landowners have been purchasing small parcels and then buying multiple adjoining parcels, creating larger and larger blocks of land. I have seen as many as 25 small forested tracts combined into one large parcel. Most of the properties I own, over 50 acres, are made up of several smaller tracts. This is a story that has never been told because it simply doesn't fit DCNR's narrative. We are told that once these large tracts are developed, that the streams will be negatively affected. Is DCNR and PENNVEST saying that DEP and the Fish Commission aren't doing their job? We know too well that the regulators are quite thorough in this role. And there is also a statewide stormwater management program that the counties, planning commissions, and conservation districts have to enforce. So the regulatory community is already taking care of protecting, the streams. This is simply another excuse for DCNR to gain power and control over northern tier timberlands, and that would be through the easement acquisitions. The real threat to sustainability of our industry is government land sprawl. As DCNR and PGC is eliminating approximately 10,000 acres of private property every year through their acquisition projects. As far as the, quote, donated easement that is part of this transaction on the 9,000 acres in Cameron County, do we know if Lime Timber will be seeking a tax write-off for the value of those development rights on this tract? Typically, the values that I've been seeing being on the Federal Forest Legacy Subcommittee are around $1,000 an acre. Will the taxpayers lose $9 million, which is the potential for this write-off? Real estate appraisers are placing values on development rights without having any idea if those properties can actually be developed. This is another program that needs a lot of scrutiny. In closing, I am hoping that all involved in this Lime Timber transaction are held accountable for any wrongdoing. This is clearly Pennsylvania's version of the swamp that desperately needs drained. Thank you.
I'll open up to questions. Representative Mao.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keith, can you repeat the part at somewhere near the beginning of your speech where you said you had 3 denials laying in front of you?
Got them right here.
Can you tell me who they are for?
Oil Creek Township, Venango County. 3 years in a row we applied for PENNVEST. I have the emails from PENNVEST denying the funding. And I guarantee you these are not the only ones out there. Why would you go to RUS if you could get a 1% loan to get 3 to 3.25%?
And you have those denials in PENNVEST?
Right here.
letterhead, and we were just told 15 minutes ago to us, you guys never turned one down.
Since last time we did that was 2015. I don't know what your letters are.
Let me tell you, think about this. For all the RUS loans out there, what if all those folks, all these municipalities, and this is for water and sewage projects, came to PENNVEST today and said, we want to renegotiate, we want to pay off our RUS loans, get a 1% PENNVEST loan. Can you imagine the demand on PENNVEST and the savings that would be to our customers? It would be phenomenal.
I don't remember putting a date on asking that question of denials. I just asked if you turn them down. And the answer came back right here 15 minutes ago that we don't turn anybody down. They've all been funded.
I'll read this to you. I regret to inform you that your project was not able to be recommended to the PENNVEST Board of Directors for approval at their October 2009 meeting. I have one from 2010 and one from 2011. And we started the process since we gave up on PENNVEST, and multiple other townships have done the same thing. We then went to RUS, and like I said, that would have saved
What is
our
RUS?
customers. Rural Utility Service under USDA. It's a federal program.
So these projects actually got done?
Correct. Only through RUS. And again, the interest alone, I think it was, our secretary said $90,000 a year under RUS would have been $30,000 under a 1% PENNVEST loan.
I'll be damned.
And I'm just guaranteeing you, those are not the only, this is two little townships back to back in Venango County.
We just been lied to.
In the interest of fairness, I will give Mr. Johnson the opportunity to respond if he so chooses.
Absolutely. No,
We're about gathering information and, you know.
Well,
they're conflicting.
Right. That's what I mean. We're about gathering information.
I asked a serious question.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and if you misunderstood, or if I misspoke, let me put it that way. The last time we turned anybody down was 2015. Those three projects we turned down in 2015. We haven't turned anybody down since 2015 forward. And as I said, we had, for a long period of time, funded probably 2/3 to a half, and 1/3 of the projects to half the projects were not funded. Up until 2009, when the ERA money came through and cleared out, and I think that's about the time that you guys applied, probably was 2009, when there was a bunch of, we funded 1 billion projects that year, but there were still a bunch of projects at the bottom of the list that did not receive a funding offer. That's, if I thought that's what I had said to begin with. If I didn't say that before, and that's exactly what happened. We have not deferred any project since 2015. That was the last time that we did.
All right, that part, I just interpret it as, no, everybody that applies gets money, at least in some capacity.
That has happened since 2015 till now. That's correct.
Has any of these ones that have been denied before 2015 reapplied?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
I guarantee you, we will be reapplying in multiple other townships to restructure our loans. We'll get the PENNVEST 1% loan and pay off our RUS loans. It's saving our customers a lot of money.
Can they do that, Brian?
No, if the legislation actually says that we cannot refinance. Act 16, 1988 says that we cannot refinance.
So they're tied into a much higher rate.
They're tied into 3% for 40 years, probably.
And at the same time, we're giving a very, very wealthy company a 1% loan while they're paying 3, 4, 5, but, okay.
And again, it's very misleading to say that, the 1% was because that's a poor district, a low-income district, which is what we just heard. That's only when the municipality that's in there, living there, working there, applying, should get that low-interest loan, not a extremely wealthy TMO.
I get that 100%. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Additional questions from members? Representative Zimmerman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for your testimony. Just a kind of qualification question. Do you know whether these properties are pretty much under clean and green? Is that?
Yes, they absolutely are.
All of them?
As far as I know, they all are. Yep, I've talked to a couple land managers that have worked on those extensively, and they definitely told me that every one of those counties has clean and green and they're all in. And it would be very unlikely to not be in clean and green.
So if that's the case, they're either not zoned at all, or else they're agriculture or conservation open space type zoning?
Well, there wouldn't be any zoning in most of these rural northern tier counties, just like in my county. So, the point is, we've heard so much about working forest conservation easements. These tracts have not been subdivided for a reason. I even heard a comment that, well, we don't want them to be cleared for farming. We have hundreds of thousands of acres of abandoned farm fields reverting back to woodlots, creating more forest land. We certainly don't have anybody clearing, forested land to farm. Most of those lands weren't farmed for a reason. They were too steep, too rocky, too wet, too remote, whatever. So, these comments that you're hearing are just flat out false.
So based on that, though, if there's no zoning, then theoretically they can be subdivided any way, shape, or form, and...
Well, again, to get through the subdivision regulations, and I just read you the statistics, it's not happening. And you heard of just a couple where there might be a 4,000 acre tract and maybe an acre or 2 acres is subdivided off the perimeter. But these entire tracts are not being subdivided, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. The cost, DEP has 3 different planning modules, and after you go 10 lots, you get into major component 1 and 2 and 3 planning modules, and the restrictions are extremely difficult. You can't put an on-lot sewage system on a property over 15% slope. I guarantee you most of these properties are steeper than that. And, I've got a copy of the only conservation easement for forested acres in Venango County with me. The property went from being worth $510,000, or excuse me, $510,000 to being worth $240,000 after the easement. I have a color-coded map of the elevation given to me by our Planning Commission, which I'm a member of. This property was a mile from a public road, no electric, and too steep to develop. The person put $250,000 in his pocket for development rights that were worthless, and you and I, the taxpayer, through DCNR, paid for that. And I'd be happy to share any of that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Nelson.
Just if you could touch on a little bit, you were saying the price the per acre price was just too high for local timber companies that may be interested. Were there any offers that were put in, were placed, that were of lower value that you're aware of, or was it, people just looked and said, hey?
Yeah, that I don't know. LandVest, I was told, was a broker. They're also out of New Hampshire, by the way, same place Lime Timber's from. And I've seen some LandVest deals. I've never bid on any LandVest pieces, although I have bid on TMO properties. But if this would have been left in the 23 smaller tracts as 60,000 acres, and the price would have came down just a little, I guarantee you those forest products companies would have been all over it. And especially if they could have got a 1% loan, compared to, as Lee said, 4-point-something%.
Well,
I mean, that's just an extremely huge benefit for Lime Timber to be competitive on these.
So as this program is evolving and the timber companies are becoming aware, of this type of a program, so it may be something that they may utilize in the future.
I would hope not. I think the government needs to stay completely out of the private sector marketplace. It just would raise all kinds of issues. Just think about it. If there's other companies with lands they want to sell, they're going to elevate the price and just wait for a subsidized loan to help somebody buy them at a higher price than they should be out there for. Okay. Period.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Keith, I appreciate your testimony today. So without delving too deeply into your personal affairs, you say in your testimony here that you own and manage 3,000 acres of timberland in 7 counties. So I'm assuming you're somewhat familiar with, if you were to go to the bank and you eyed up a piece of property that you'd be interested in purchasing, you would know kind of what kind of terms are out there right now.
I do it all day, every day.
Okay. So if you were to approach a lending institution in the northern tier, maybe a local institution that's familiar with lending on the value of timber, what kind of interest rate would you be talking about right now for the acquisition of land?
Exactly what Lee said. At least 4% minimum.
A minimum 4%. If you had access, and I understand, Representative Nelson just asked a question, you said you have no interest personally in government money, and I respect that, but let's just say perhaps your neighbor across the street had access to money at 1%, what opportunities would that open up for your hypothetical neighbor's forest products business?
Well, again, it's just a very uneven playing field in the marketplace when you have someone that's subsidized and the other ones aren't. There's just no way you can compete with that. And then if you start talking about the conservation easement game, the average price that I'm seeing is $1,000 an acre with the conservation easements that we've seen through the Forest Legacy program. This is a federal program to buy easements for forested land. We've set up a very strict set of rankings for those projects that have come before us. So that's kind of the initial easement system for forested lands. I was opposed to it from day one because, again, appraisers cannot put an accurate value on development rights if you have no idea if that property can even be developed. So it's a scam from the beginning is what I'm saying. But with this easement program, at the federal level, $1,000 an acre, multiply that out times 60,000 acres, and that's what I guarantee you Lime Timber can't wait to get their hands on, and it'll be funded by you and me, the Pennsylvania taxpayer, through Growing Greener or some other source. That's $60 million they'll have to play with in the private sector marketplace for development rights that no one has proved are even worth anything. So that's a very scary thought, but that's a real possibility. The other thing I'd like to mention is, again, going back to the working forest conservation easement, I get tired of hearing that because, again, there's no legal authority by the easement owner to force anyone to cut trees any certain way. It's just not there. One other thing I'd like to touch on is we heard that there were larger loans granted to other entities, but those were point source loans, Mr. Johnson said. This by far is the largest non-point source loan. When I looked at the list, unless I didn't see them all, the largest one I saw was like $900,000. This is $50.8 million. It's non-point source. Totally different ballgame than point source, which is your water and sewage plants. Just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Klingler, you are pretty well connected with a lot of folks in the Northern Tier and talk to a lot of folks I know. And do you have any knowledge of future projects, as we've discussed here today, that may come before PENNVEST?
I can answer a little bit of that.
I know some folks in the forest products industry may have had some more information.
Mr. Johnson said he didn't have a lot of information on the second application. Well, I can give you a little more than he did. It's in Jones, and most of that land's in Jones and Ridgeway Township, Elk County, and there's a little bit in McKean County. I've gotten calls from the Elk County commissioners, the planning director, and the township supervisors, all asking questions because they're not very well informed when the pitchmen go and, give them their spiel. Once they've gotten the information, they are very, very concerned about this. So that's what I can tell you about application number 2. Application number 3, I don't know a lot, but I've just heard it's in more counties than some of the other ones. I don't know how many acres.
So you're hearing that there are 2 more projects, but you don't know how many acres or would be involved?
Correct. But I think the second one is in the 25,000 acre range.
Thank you for the information. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for the time.
Our next testifiers are Arthur Stewart, the president of Caledonia Land Company, and Tyler Martin, the vice president of Caledonia Land Company. They've made the trip down from Warren County. They've sat here patiently for 3 hours plus, and thank you for being here with us, and you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate being here. I was raised in Warren, and I practiced law there for many years. I primarily handled real estate and municipal law. At the close of my legal career, I represented about 35 municipal organizations, which included school districts as well as many townships, boroughs, and water and sewage authorities that were the beneficiaries of PENNVEST funding. I've owned several businesses. I had a sand business, which I sold. I've been in the oil and gas business for a number of years, and I grew up on a timber and tree farm, which I continue to operate and grow. I'm an 11-year member of my school board, 15-year member of the United Fund, 25-year member of the Salvation Army Advisory Board, and a member of the Allegheny College Board of Trustees, and I serve on several other boards unique to either my community or the timber and oil and gas business. I begin my testimony wearing my school director hat. The Warren County School District faces the same challenges faced by many Pennsylvania rural school districts, namely a shrinking general population, a shrinking student population, and a static or shrinking tax base. When I was a high school student, Warren County enjoyed a general population of 47,500 and a student population of over 12,000. Today, the general population is slipping below 40,000 and the student population has shrunk to 4,300, nearly a two-thirds drop. Our real estate tax base is static, meaning we must raise local property taxes or rely on increased state funding to meet ever-rising insurance, pension, I'll say pension again, and salary obligations. It's a wearisome fight. Contributing to that weariness is the amount of federal and state-controlled land in our school district. The vast acreage controlled by the Allegheny National Forest and the state game lands is off-limits to development that could enhance our school district's tax base. That lack of development opportunity has the direct impact of reduced funding for our school students. It also has the indirect impact of reduced opportunities for employment or for entrepreneurial success. And so we have the heart-sickening consequence of watching our young children graduate and move away to states that welcome the development opportunities that allow a young family to thrive. This sad outcome is not unique to Warren County. As many of you are aware, shrinking general populations, shrinking school populations, and withering tax base are realities faced across rural Pennsylvania. A forest conservation easement is another limitation to develop opportunity. When the state of Pennsylvania helps put in place the forest conservation easement, what the state is saying is this. This is acreage where the state prohibits a home. This is acreage where the state prohibits a machine shop. This is where the state prohibits a restaurant. And you heard it even prohibits the farm. Unfortunately, stores, houses, machine shops, and restaurants are the manifestations of a healthy human population. Pennsylvania's rural society is already unhealthy. The data clearly tells us that Pennsylvania's rural schools spend much less per pupil than is spent in more developed areas, that rural income significantly lags the rest of the state, and that the rural population is old. The limits inherent in the forest conservation easement further aggravate these health problems. There is a jarring irony here when you consider that the state funding enabling the new limitation comes through the PENNVEST program. I'm now wearing my former municipal solicitor hat when I tell you stories of many, many PENNVEST projects that I handled when I represented townships, boroughs, and water and sewage authorities. Let's be clear. In each one of those many projects, the PENNVEST money was used to fund the installation of new water and sewage projects. I trust all of us would agree that the fundamental purpose of water and sewer lines is to serve the very homes, stores, restaurants, and machine shops that the forest conservation easement disallows. How, on the one hand, is PENNVEST funding used to impose an easement which disallows development, while on the other hand, PENNVEST funding is devoted to hundreds, if not thousands, of water and sewer projects which result in precisely that kind of development? Make no mistake, PENNVEST funding for water and sewer projects fosters development in Pennsylvania. In several of my many PENNVEST projects, the community I served was under a DEP order banning new housing or new business development until municipal water or sewage was installed. In some situations, applications for new homes or businesses were backlogged for years, and the development could only go forward when the PENNVEST funding was awarded. It's a strange government program that fosters development of homes, restaurants, and businesses, while at the same time funds an easement that entirely stifles the development of homes, restaurants, and businesses. As a school director and father of 4 children who I hope will raise grandchildren in Warren County, I have a vested interest in this matter. The Lime Timber Company has already announced this transaction on its website, and it includes more than the 6 counties. It includes Warren County on its website. and it announces that it will treat the entire 67,500 acres as a, quote, single comprehensive conservation easement. In my testimony before you, I've included a copy of that Lime webpage. And I'll share with you that as I wrote this testimony last night, I emailed it to my fellow board members, and to a person, every board member has gotten back to me and said they share these concerns. I've not heard from a couple of the board members, but the majority have applauded the remarks that I've just made. I close my testimony by telling you about my vested interest as a business owner. I'm now wearing my hat as president of Caledonia Land Company. We are a tree-growing company that I formed a few years ago after my mother's death. My mother died. I inherited about 700 acres of timberland in Warren County. Caledonia, over the years, has purchased another 3,200 acres of timberland in Warren County. We use professional forest consultants, and I take joy in walking my dog, cross-country skiing, and walking with my family on our several parcels. Wood from our parcels is in our homes and our office, and we selectively cut trees that are sold to local buyers, leaving behind healthy trees for future harvest, seed trees for future generations, and saplings that already demonstrate the exceptional growing quality of the Allegheny Plateau. We plant trees, we spend dollars on timber stand improvement. We hired an arborist from Amherst to treat our white ash trees against the emerald ash borer. In short, we manage our timberland, remembering that we live in our own nest. And Caledonia is not an exception. Our professional forest consultant manages several 100,000 acres owned by local landowners just like my family. Our forest consultant brings the same silvicultural practices to those hundreds of thousands of acres, and the continued availability of high-quality timber from private parcels speaks of the resounding health of privately owned forests in northwestern Pennsylvania. What I protest in my testimony is the remarkably unfair competition which this proposed use of PENNVEST money would wreak upon my timber company. With my testimony before you, I've provided to you a document. It shows how Caledonia acquired the 3,200 acres of timberland that Caledonia has added to what I inherited. I'm not ashamed of the numbers. They're in the public record, but as you can see from that document, we spent a little over $6 million to buy that 3,200 acres. Any borrowing that Caledonia does is, of course, at the commercial rates of between 4% and 6%, as we've already heard. On the $6 million that I spent, the savings in interest in 1 year alone, between 1% PENNVEST money and a commercial rate of 5%, would be $240,000. I find that to be a remarkable sum. Of course, Lime Timber Company can afford an acid mine drainage project. The savings that Lime is going to enjoy by using PENNVEST money is many, many times greater than the cost of the mine drainage project, and that's to say nothing of the dollars that Mr. Klingler spoke about that they will likely yield in terms of payment for forest easement on the other 50,000 acres that they're not donating the forest conservation easement on. Caledonia would be thrilled to do a 1% purchase deal, as would countless private other landowners. It's a government giveaway. I'd call it a no-brainer. But what would ever lead me to believe that I should apply to PENNVEST for such funds? Here I am, a Pennsylvania resident, not New Hampshire. The Pennsylvania Infrastructure Act is expressly focused on water, sewage, and stormwater projects, with those being specifically mentioned in the legislative intent and in the definition of project. Undoubtedly, when you fund PENNVEST, you think of the dollars being spent on water, sewage, and stormwater projects. When you allow PENNVEST money to be used to benefit one private business owner over another, what kind of Pandora's box is being opened? I can think of a million uses for PENNVEST money. In 2017, my oil and gas company volunteered to plug an abandoned well that was leaking oil into the Tynesta Creek. Our cost was over $40,000 to plug the well and clean up the mess. We had no legal obligation to plug. Why don't I go around and buy leases that have lots of old wells that I agree to plug and use PENNVEST 1% money to buy oil and gas property? I'm sure your imaginations can come up with similar no-brainer desires for a PENNVEST handout. By establishing this large precedent with Lime Timber, what are the boundaries on private projects that PENNVEST approves? And what does the expenditure of PENNVEST dollars on private projects mean, not only for competition to private owners like me, but also on the remaining pool of money left over for infrastructure projects that PENNVEST typically funds? I think this proposed use of PENNVEST money is poor government policy. It creates an irreconcilable conflict on where Pennsylvania stands on development in our rural communities, and by its precedent, the Lime Timber Project launches PENNVEST into the realm of competing with countless private enterprises for uses limited only by the creativity of our imaginations. If Pennsylvania wants to do acid mine projects, then continue the acid mine funding that's already in place. If Pennsylvania wants to create a new 67,500 acre park, then put it in a legitimate bill and debate in the public whether that's good spending of the people's money. But please don't subvert or allow to be subverted the Pennsylvania Infrastructure Investment Authority Act into a backdoor, smoky room deal-making machine. Unless you have questions of me directly, I turn this over to our Vice President, Tyler Martin. Tyler has expertise in data management, and he'll address some statements made in the document used to support the PENNVEST application. Is that acceptable, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. Tyler, you may proceed, and then we'll go to questions of both of you after Tyler.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I received a Bachelor of Science degree in Geography and Applied Geographical Technology from Slippery Rock University. I was formerly a wetland delineator for a private engineering firm. I now work as the Environmental Care Coordinator for a conventional oil and gas company. I serve as the Vice President of Caledonia Land Company. I lead our GIS mapping system, install and maintain erosion and sedimentation controls, and coordinate timber stand improvement projects on Caledonia property. It should be of serious concern to all of us that the lime timber application is premised on the statement that is patently untrue. Under the heading, problem to be solved by project, the application states, large-scale commercial timberlands are being sold subdivided at an unprecedented rate. Based on the fear of rampant subdivision, the application then offers the solution of a forest conservation easement to stop subdivision development. I ask you to examine these two books. The first is the Warren County Plat Book from 1977, containing the map of every county parcel. The second is the current Plat Book from 40 years later. You will see that rampant subdivision is not underway. The same largely privately owned timber parcels are still intact. What is true for Warren County is also true for the surrounding rural counties.
Mr. Chairman, could I have your permission to pass around these two books, the one that's 40 years old and the one that's current?
Yes.
And I have them on page 17 for the old one, which is the one with the plastic binder.
And
page 43.
No, 42.
I'm sorry, 42 for the metal binder. And those two represent the same areas. And you'll see that the parcels are identical 40 years later. There is no rampant subdivision.
Yes, that'd be fine. Thank you.
We need those back. We don't have another copy of the 1977 version.
We won't keep them.
As Mr. Stewart noted, rural Pennsylvania is besieged by a lack of development. To further measure the truthfulness of whether subdivision is occurring at an unprecedented rate, I ask you to consider the census data. If subdivision were occurring at an unprecedented rate, we would certainly be seeing population numbers increasing rapidly. Yet, in the 10 years preceding the last census, the population decreased in 6 of the 7 counties involved in this application. PENNVEST has approved an application that fixes a problem that does not exist. In fact, in many cases, the opposite of timberland subdivision is occurring in northwestern Pennsylvania. One of our largest private landowners is the Collins Pine Company. Decades ago, Collins Pine owned less than 20,000 acres in Pennsylvania. Today, Collins' ownership has grown to over 100,000 acres. On a smaller scale, companies like Caledonia are consolidating timberlands by purchasing neighboring parcels. If you will look at the attached map 1, you will see that in Meade Township, Caledonia purchased 24 acres of property in 2013, added 11 acres in 2015, and added 348 acres in 2017, making a contiguous parcel of 383 acres. Map 2 shows a similar result in Sheffield Township. Map 3 shows the purchase of 3 parcels in Pleasant Township. And Map 4 shows our largest effort, where in Pine Grove and Elk Townships, Caledonia and its predecessors began with 549 acres and continued to add parcels, creating a total of over 900 acres, nearly contiguous acres by 2017. In my role as GIS coordinator, I am very familiar with this type of data, and I can assure you that Caledonia is not alone in the business of consolidating timberlands. I believe we should also be concerned with conclusions drawn by the Pennsylvania Infrastructure Investment Authority. In its analysis, PENNVEST states forests and water quality in northwest Pennsylvania face a number of threats. Based on the concern of declining water quality, PENNVEST then supports the use of the conservation easement to protect the allegedly endangered waters of northwestern Pennsylvania. Contrary to the unfounded fears, a study of the data actually reveals that northwestern Pennsylvania enjoys some of the best water quality in the state. I conducted a streams statistics analysis using the Geographic Information System and the Chapter 93 designated use streams layer. In the 7-county project area, there were over 60,000 acres. Where the 60,000 acres are located, there are roughly 16,000 miles of stream. Of these 16,000 miles of stream, approximately 7,000 enjoy the prestigious stream designation HQ, high quality, EV, exceptional value, or TSF, trout stocking. This is higher than the state average. Moreover, stream quality is being upgraded, not downgraded in northwestern Pennsylvania. Water quality is not suffering from the non-existent development that the Pennsylvania Investment Authority analysis portrays. Finally, I would like to challenge the statement repeated in the application and PENNVEST analysis that says this project will create over 50 new jobs in Cameron, Clinton, Elk, Jefferson, McKean, Potter, and Venango counties. In my experience, the 60,000 acres of timberland will not support 50 jobs. Even if this acreage were not already subject to harvesting, the amount of timber that 60,000 acres can generate would support a handful of jobs at best. However, the acreage in question is not virgin timberland, where no harvesting has occurred. In fact, the acreage is significantly cut over, and jobs have already been generated by the timber removed from the property while it was in its unprotected non-easement state. The forest conservation easement will not yield more jobs than this property has yielded in the past. And in the future, this property is perfectly capable of yielding jobs without a forest conservation easement. I think we should be seriously concerned about the several conclusions and statements that are key to the application, but which are not supported by actual facts or statistics. Thank you.
Questions from the members. Representative Mao?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will try to be brief. It's tough for me to do. This deal that is set up for this 60,000 acres on a 1% loan, from what I'm hearing from you, this is a sweetheart deal of all sweetheart deals, correct?
Yes, Representative. Yes, Representative. Everyone knew about the Hancock property. It's generally regarded as having been seriously overpriced, or as Mr. Klingler said, if it had been broken up, it would have been of interest. How can we possibly compete borrowing money at 4% and 6% with this transaction? Not only are they having the great savings of nearly $2 million a year, but then they're going to turn it. You could do this deal, and you're not in the timber business. You're going to turn around, you're going to sell your conservation easement for $1,000 an acre, or $700 an acre, multiply that by 50,000 for the acres that aren't being given away. And then you're going to have the enjoyment of the free money, and then you're going to cut 88 million board feet of timber in the next umpteen years. I assure you.
It's a no-brainer.
You could do that deal.
I get it. So if somebody would have come to you and said, hey, I'll give you this deal, 1%, and you had the big enough company to handle it, you'd have jumped all over it.
My biggest danger would have been the people behind me trying to run over top of me to get there first.
Yeah. Would you have done it at 2%?
Yes, sir.
Would you have done it at 3%?
You'd probably find that to be an attractive deal, especially you would need the payment for the forest conservation.
Let me
easement.
tell you a quick story. I sold an antique car a few years back, and I thought that I really made out like a bandit on it, not knowing what I had. And I found out after the car was gone that it was so rare. No wonder the guy bought it overnight at full price. Didn't even ask. Sent me a check in the mail sight unseen. When I found out I left twice the amount of money I could have gotten lay on the table, to this day I'm still kicking myself very hard for doing that. I have to wonder why PENNVEST would let 2 to 3 times the interest lay on the table.
Yes, sir. I can't answer that. I will say this. I don't want my testimony or our testimony to be construed as sour grapes, and we would chase down this deal if we had the opportunity. I go back to my first comments. I think this is bad policy for Pennsylvania. It's bad policy for rural Pennsylvania. Look, the fundamental truth is this timber is going to be harvested, whether it's owned by Lime or some other company. Gosh, it's been harvested hard. And what benefit is really being derived by this expenditure? And gosh, this decision isn't made in a vacuum. What harm has anybody asked the question at PENNVEST, or you're now asking the question, what harm flows from this? And I'm here to tell you on behalf of school kids, where I've served as a school board member for 11 years, there's a lot of harm. You got to take that into account too.
Thank you. I sincerely hope that those involved rethink this decision, maybe put this whole project on hold until they get a handle on it, and all questions be floated through the General Assembly. After all, it is taxpayers' money we're talking about. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Mao. Representative James?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Art. Thank you. Just a quick comment, if I may. Clearly, we've heard 2 sides of the coin today. And if anybody isn't aware of it, I'm a very pro-business guy. The secretary, in writing here on her testimony in paragraph 4, makes a positive statement about owning, or the private ownership of land is still 70% in Pennsylvania. That means 30% of our land mass is owned by the government, and I don't consider that a particularly good deal. I just wanted to make that statement. I think we need less private ownership, less public ownership, and we should be looking for ways to divest ourselves. The comment from Art troubles me greatly about the easements preventing any development down the future. I mean, humans are at the top of the food chain here, and we should be worried more about our own good than the good of oak trees, elm trees, that sort of a thing. That's my comment on that one. Lime finances, as described today, to me sound extremely bankable. And by that I mean they could go out in the public sector, pay the going rate, and do this deal without our help. So I think we may be, it seems like a very glamorous deal. I think we may have missed the boat in doing the right thing for Pennsylvania citizens. I'm especially disturbed about their lack of truthfulness in the application, Mr. Chairman, where they say they're involved, systematically they're involved in all the things they should be, but they really aren't. That's troublesome. And as a former banker, that would have been grounds right there to cancel the deal. I would not have done it. The other thing I guess I want to say about Hancock, I'm just finding out about them. They're in the same exact business. I'm going to do a little digging there too, and I hope to not find a trend around the United States of America in which these guys are buying and selling the same ground on sweetheart deals like this. And if that's taking place, that's another reason the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania should put this to an end right here. That's it. Thank you.
Representative James, may I just respond very briefly? There's a parcel that I've watched for a number of years that I politically had my eye on. I tried to buy it A few years ago, I gave an offer. The gentleman got back to me and said that wasn't adequate. He had another offer. He was going to turn around and sell it. That deal fell through. He got back to me and said, if you'll sell, give me this. And it wasn't worth it. That property's been on the market now for 2 years. The for sale sign, it fell over last year. Another broker came in, put up a different for sale sign. I know what they want for it. It's generally overpriced. What's the precedent in Warren County if this deal with PENNVEST is done on that parcel? It's going to make it impossible for me to buy parcels, and it's going to make it impossible for anybody to do a non-government supported deal. So in answer to Representative Mall and answer to you, I hope that Pennsylvania doesn't do another one of these deals, because then it makes the government the arbiter of who buys what piece of private property. Is that the business that government's in? It's not the government that I learned in school. I hope it's not our government that we're descending into.
Representative Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and your testimony is very much appreciated. I think the diverse testimony across the board today, for the coordination of the hearing, it seems to really shed some light on the foundational issue of PENNVEST, which is a very quality program intended for municipal water authority, maybe branching out into areas where, back to this issue where the government would be determining winners and losers, and I'm not sure how that would impact a lot of our other community banks, which would be involved in making those loans. It might be a deeper policy dive, an alternative policy dive. I understand and empathize with your position of saying that, hey, this land, now you might be able to use this government program to, it really kind of puts the banking industry in a whole different light, the private banking industry, because of, again, the quality of the PENNVEST program and what it can do for areas that need those infrastructure loans. It's more that, back to that gray area, the consequence of the gray area, that I appreciate your effort in the hearing today and putting it together to really clarify. That seems to be the choice of how much government are we going to have involved in the private use of land development. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. It's very much appreciated. Today, this is an informational meeting on this topic. I think that a lot of information has been presented. Questions that keep coming back to me are, is this the best use of public resources? And is this an eligible project under the law? So a lot of information has been presented, a lot of questions have been answered, but it's generated even more questions. So I think that we still have some work to do as a committee looking into this issue. But I do thank all of our testifiers today. Thank you for being here for 3.5 hours. And the information that's been presented will help the committee as we continue to look over this issue and review this issue. So thank you to all of our testifiers. Thank you to the members, and this meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.